Good morning. Good morning. In the name of electoral accountability and reform, can you please move forward so that people who are coming late will not disturb us as we start with the program? Can you please just move a bit forward? Yeah. Sheldon, can you please move forward as we start with the program? Siyacela. Can you, yeah. Can the two speakers please come forward? Dr. Shisanya, please come forward. Oh. All right. Yeah. Hello, good morning. Good morning. I'd like to officially greet all of you this morning. I'd like to greet you all. I'd like to greet our special panelists, Mr. Spamandla Mhlongo, Mr. Mkolisi Nyusa as he's coming up, Dr. Florence Shisanya. We'd like to greet you this morning. Bonolo. Good morning, everybody. Our partners, morning, political parties that are here, all the civil society organizations, members of the media, we greet you all this morning and may we have a beautiful engagement this morning. Thank you so much. I'm now going to hand over to Ms. Bonolo Makale, who's going to be facilitating this engagement. Thank you so much. Good morning.
Good morning. Where's everyone? Where are the speakers?
The speakers of Dr. Shisanya Nanga.
Can you ask her to come here? Good morning, everyone. Okay, this is weird. Yes, how do I? There we go. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bonolo Makale from the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. It's good to be here with you this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. A special welcome to Dr. Florence Shisanya and Mr. Spamandla Mhlongo. I look forward to having this conversation with you. We're waiting for our third speaker who will be here soon. But in the meantime, we'll get going. So electoral accountability reform and voter turnout is at the core of our discussion today. Elections are held as one of the hallmarks of a functioning democracy. And the success or failure of a particular democratic project is usually measured by the existence of free, fair, and credible elections. Elections also provide an important moment for a democratic expression of citizens of a state and will allow the majority and the minority to express their opinion and potentially hold governments accountable by having an option to vote in officials who will govern the country for a specific period. So briefly, before I hand over to the speakers, I want to just make a brief reflection on voter accountability, on electoral reform, and voter turnout. Electoral accountability is a concept that's strongly linked to the democratic expression of the will of the people. It has been described as a process where an electorate will either punish or reward the incumbent government based on the ability to deliver or not during elections. In the South African context in particular, the conversation around electoral accountability becomes especially important at local government level, because at this level, that's where government is mostly close to its citizens, where performance and non-performance is concerned. This is the level of government most associated with service delivery, which means which is actually a contentious issue in South Africa and a leading cause of protest that we have seen over the years in South Africa. And particularly on voter turnout, theories of voter behavior assessing behavior of South Africans at the poll show varying results as to the decision that influence the voting patterns of the electorate in particular. Decisions to vote for a specific party may be based on issues such as patronage, political clientelism, party loyalty based on influence of socioeconomic factors, and particularly in South Africa, race and class are one of the strong features when it comes to how people vote. And we noted this earlier that you'll see that a typical Black person will vote for the ANC or the EFF, while a white person will vote for the DA or Freedom Plus, for an example. Now, citizen participation in South Africa local government elections is significantly less than participation in general elections, with voter turnouts in municipal election being less than that of national elections. And this is not something that's new, or rather South Africa is not an exception in this case. This is a trend that is common around the world as people attach more importance to national elections as opposed to local government elections. Particularly in South Africa, there's a downward trend in voter turnout when one assesses the turnout from the first democratic elections to the most recent one, the 2019 elections. In the 2019 elections, we saw an overall decrease of 66% in turnout of registered voters. Research suggests that the decline in voter turnout and participation points to issues of mistrust in the electoral processes and to a disengaged population, which is increasingly becoming a case in South Africa. And there are several socio-political cleavages that are influencing the decline of voter turnout. And key among them would be the age, gender, geographical location, and psychological issues. Now, when you think about electoral reform, or rather electoral accountability as an influence of voter behavior, we see this as an issue in South Africa. The recent data, particularly in 2019 elections and the 2016 elections, it shows a trend that poor performance of government influence voters to go cast their votes to show dissatisfaction with the ruling party. Again, and we noted this yesterday, you remember that post the 2016 local government elections, the ANC lost Johannesburg, they lost Tshwane, and they lost the Nelson Mandela Bay. We have seen electoral accountability playing out in South African electoral influence by issues such as corruption, state-sponsored violence. If you think about police brutality that we've seen in the post-apartheid government, if you think about Marikana, police brutality that we saw last year amid COVID-19, police brutality that we see when there are protests of young people. And so these are some of the, and of course, the general failure to provide basic service delivery. So all of these impact whether people go vote or not. And ultimately, what that speaks of is how citizens engage with the state and how citizens lose trust on the state. And I think it's important to know that, particularly in the case of an election violence, is important to note when one reflects on issues of voter turnout in the region. Traditionally, this region has seen conflicts between the IFP and the ANC, which often results in a violent manner. It has been reported that in certain instances, party-sponsored or incited violence is used as an intimidation tool to force members of the public in certain areas to vote along specific party lines, or in some cases prevent them from accessing the polls altogether. And then when we think about electoral reform, which will be part of our conversation today, you know, we are going to be voting in October as announced by the president. And in 2020, the Constitutional Court ruled that Electoral Act was unconstitutional to the extent that it did not allow for the contestation of independent candidates in elections. Discussions around electoral reform includes the format in which the new system will take, considering that the Constitution mandates a system of proportional representation. There's also a discussion about accessibility of the system to the electorate and the need to adopt systems that will be understandable to those voting. Now, the proposed amendment to the Electoral Act also provides a moment to look at the current power dynamics in the electoral landscape of South Africa and how we imagine this changing based on the amendment. And so independent candidates in South Africa may still need to be affected by issues such as unfamiliar competition between them and candidates that have the backing of their political parties. This may manifest in particularly financial constraints. And again, this is not an exception for South African countries like Nigeria, for example. The Constitution gives rights for independent candidates, but then they put crazy amounts of money that now independent candidates will have to pay to their IEC for them to participate in the vote. So the financial constraints that comes with that are also very important to note. But also to just help us have this conversation, because I think it's a very important conversation to have, that what will that look like? Because I think it then speaks of what democracy will look like for us, because then it opens up a space for ordinary citizens to be able to run for office, you know. But I've got a panel of great experts to help us have this conversation. As I noted, we've got Dr. Florence Shisanya. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, ma'am. And then we've got Mr. Mkolisi Nyiswa, and then we have Mr. Spamandla Mhlongo, who will just help us unpack this conversation as we prepare for elections, the conversation around voter turnout, which is a very significant issue in South Africa. And it's good to see a lot of young people in the room, because that's also one of the biggest things that I think we may need to flag in terms of the disillusionment that exists among young South Africans who have generally lost trust in the ruling party, and generally lost trust not just in the ruling party, but in the electoral processes itself. So I'm looking forward to us having the conversation around what do we do then to fix the voter turnout that we've been seeing. And Ospamandla will look at election observation, which I also think it's very important, because what it then means is that, you know, it speaks to making sure that we see fair and credible and transparent and free elections. And then Mr. Mkolisi will reflect on what violent protests look like, particularly in this region, and if at all will have an impact in what the October elections will look like. And so I'm going to hand over to Dr. Florence. Thank you, ma'am. I agree, or I concur with this.
To indicate that the truth is the voter turnout has been declining with time. So just to confirm that.
Okay, so sorry, Dr. Shisanya, before you go ahead, Colleagues, if I may ask, I've been hearing a lot of cell phone noise, which is disruptive to because some of us, we don't write our stuff down because we've been in the profession for so long. So we get disrupted in terms of our train of thought. And she called us experts, so we know our stuff off the cuff. No, I'm joking. But if we could respectfully please keep our phones on silent. I know that some of us are engaged in various other meetings whilst we are in this meeting. And whilst we appreciate that you chose us today, please also be respectful of the panel in terms of their presentation. We will also respect when you have an opportunity to speak as well. Thank you. Sorry.
So just to indicate that I concur with the speaker, to say that looking at data, you find that the voter turnout has been declining over time. And we confirmed that by looking at the 2016 results from Buffalo Metro in the Eastern Cape. But before I look at that, I'll just indicate that I'll just still confirm why we need to vote. Why is it important that the citizens vote? So one of the reasons why it is key that we vote is that elections promote accountability on the part of the leaders and improves their representativeness to the general public. Because if someone is aware that if I don't treat the electoral well, if I don't meet the agreements that I made with them, then they'll not vote me in. Then they are forced to behave or to conform to that agreement. The other reason is that elections help to resolve the issues of leadership succession by removing individual claims or entitlements to power. So we've seen that in some countries where there are no proper electoral systems, or there's nothing that, there are no rules that guide people on how to hand over leadership, then we end up with the dictators. People want to rule for the rest of their lives, they do whatever they want. But when proper systems are in place, people vote and, already there's a plan in place. So there are no issues of violence and what have you, because people know that this is the way out. Then the other thing is that elections are means of promoting political stability by ensuring a peaceful and orderly transfer of power from one individual or group to another, especially where there is usually post-conflict states. So we have seen that some countries have been at war for many years. And this is just because there are no proper election systems. For example, Liberia, since they conducted a peaceful election and Ellen Joseph took over, Liberia has been peaceful. Somalia, up to now, there is no peace because there hasn't been any proper election taking place. So we see that when people vote, they end up being satisfied with the choices that they make. But if they are not allowed to vote, then we have imposters, people who impose who impose themselves on the people, and they want to rule by force. So I go to the study that we looked at, or that we undertook. So we looked at the election results for Buffalo City Metro. So the items that we looked at, or the variables that we looked at, were things like the number of registered voters, then we also looked at those who voted. And we all know that for metro elections or municipal local government elections, we use two systems. So there is the majoritarian system, electoral system, where I'll just give an example. You go to the polling station and the name of one of the candidates is on that list. So you pick the candidate of your choice. We are voting for your representative. Then the other election system that we use in South Africa is the PR. So they are both done concurrently. And with the proportional representative of the PR, there's a list there. Every party has presented a list of their preferred candidates. So you just vote the party, not the candidate. So both these systems have got advantages and disadvantages. And there's many a times they, when we look at the advantages, we feel that this will work for us. But when it comes to implementing or putting the system in place, then things don't work out as we had anticipated. So with the case of Buffalo Metro, something is wrong with my document. Let me just give me 1 second, please. So you find that when it comes to the election results, in some instances, for example, many a times NC gets the majority votes. So, but for the case of Buffalo Metro, yes, NC got the majority votes, especially when it comes to the ward councillors, the people that were elected directly. This is my candidate. But for the ones where they look at the list or they use the list that has been prepared, you find that NC got the list. Okay, thank you for that. So let us just quickly look at the advantages of a majoritarian system. So we are told that when we elect representatives, then they are more likely to tackle important local issues. I'd already talked about that. Then this also promotes accountability to voters. Now that you told us you are going to do this and that when we elect you, so you are forced to do as you promised. Then it also produces governments which have legislative voting majorities. So it means that these people are legally in office or they have all the authority because we gave them the power. Unlike where, this list is for ANC, for example, or this list is for EFF. They did not engage with us as citizens to say that these are the people we want to put in power. So ideally, we have not chosen them. And it means they'll not be accountable to us. And it also means that we have not given them authority to rule us. It is the party that has given them authority, but not. And it's not even the whole party, because if I'm a member of that party, I was not consulted as a common citizen. So it is the few delegates who decided that we are going to have these people, and that means that this person might as well not take care of my interests. So that is for the majoritarian. So the majoritarian style ensures that whoever I vote for takes care of my needs. Then let's move to the next slide. So I'd also talked about why we need, why vote. The next one. I think I also talked about this one. So, okay, let us look at the factors that influence voter turnout. What would make me go and vote on that voting day? So one of them is the education. The other one is ethnicity. So you realize that in In fact, it's not just the African countries. Even in the so-called developed countries, issues of race arise. So, my colleague here also talked about that. But in African countries, even South Africa, many a times somebody would want to say that this one is from my tribe, therefore I'm going to vote for them. And then the cost of participation. This one, many a times, okay, it will affect both the candidates or the representatives and also the voters. So for the voters, if, for example, I don't have a simple thing, something as simple as transport, and the voting station is far away from me, then chances are I'll not vote. Sometimes one has to choose between that day's meal and the transport money to go and vote. So in such instances, it means the cost of participation is higher for the voter, and that would make the voter not participate in the voting process. The other thing is knowledge. Like what we are doing here now, we are getting knowledge. So we are able to understand that voting is my right. And when I vote, you know, I'll have a chance of making the representatives accountable and things like that. So when we have knowledge, I know how to go about any challenges that might arise, and I'm motivated to vote. But if one is not knowledgeable, then they just stay at home and say, there's no need of voting. And yet these things affect you, whether you vote or not. The results of the elections, the people who are elected will have a say over your life. So for example, when we talk about a lack of employment opportunities, it is the politicians who have a say on that. So if I don't vote wisely, then it means I'll not have leaders in place who are taking care of my interests. So that knowledge is key. You know, it's just good, like we are here now, we are sensitizing each other. We are learning why we need to vote. And we'll also go and tell our friends that, you see, we need to vote. The other thing is the cultural factors. So here we are talking about interest in politics. Some people are not interested in politics. Maybe because of cultural reasons, religion. There are people whose religion dictate that there should be no voting. So they don't involve themselves at all. And then degree of partisanship among the citizens. Sometimes, you know, I belong to this group. And when I look around, I feel that my group is not represented in these elections. So why should I go and vote? For example, maybe we are from one of the smallest tribes, or the issues of race will still also come in here. So none of these people is representing me, or none of them is. I don't know any of them. They don't even understand me. They don't understand my culture. So even if I elect them, they'll not take care of my interests. So as a result of that, people don't vote. And then institutional factors. Here we are looking at rules and laws that govern election processes. And here we could look at, things like voter registration. What is the time span? Is it just too short? Are the conditions suitable, favorable to everyone? The location of polling stations, how far are they from me? Like now, there are rumors that voting could be done online. Will that include everyone, even people who are not, people who don't have access to internet? How would they vote online and things like that? So here, we are looking at institutional factors, even the issues of the type of electoral system that is being used. Is it proportionality? Many a times they say that proportionality allows everybody to be taken care of, all the parties and that way, or even all the citizens. But in reality, sometimes that is never the case. And then in some places, they also talk about compulsory voting. Everybody must vote. So that way you are forced to vote whether you like it or not. So those are some of the institutional factors that affect or influence voter turnout. Then we looked at the local government elections, as I mentioned, for Metro in South Africa. And here, they use two systems. I'd already mentioned that. So these two systems are what we refer to as a mixed system. And here there is PR and also majoritarian, where you vote for your councillor, the ward councillor, and also you look at that list, if it is the DA list, so you just vote DA. You don't have a choice of who is on that list or who is not on that list. So one, majoritarian is where you vote your representative. Sometimes they call it plurality, but we will not go into all those details now. Okay, then, so we are saying that in South Africa, for the municipal elections, we use those two types, and that's why we are calling it mixed system. Then the other thing is that only registered voters must vote. Not anybody can walk in and say, today I'm going to vote. So for the Metro Council, as I've indicated there, the representatives that are on the party list will end up representing voters from a party. And then for the ward councillors, we'll have the councillors of our choice. Let's move to the next slide. So this is the table that shows the election results for 2016 for Buffalo City. The parties are on the far left. So the parties that were involved in these elections were African National Congress, Democratic Alliance, Economic Freedom Fighters, African Independent Congress. We also had independent candidates, Pan-African Congress, United Democratic Movement, Congress of the People, African Christian Democratic Party, and others. So those were the voters. That the second column, the third column is for the voters, those who turned out to vote for the ward councillors. And then the fourth column is those who voted for the list, the party list. And then those are the totals. And as you can see, ANC is leading with only 58%. So that is very small. And that's why we said that the voter turnout has been declining over the years. And then the other discrepancy that we found was that you can see that ANC is leading with the number of voters. So it means the ANC has or got 45 councillors, ward councillors to represent them, or the 45 councillors that we got from that municipality were for ANC. But when it comes to the list that ANC presented, they could only get 15 representatives. So that 45 and 15, then you look at 5 and 19. If DA had only 5 ward councillors, how come they got 19 representatives? So there's a discrepancy there.
Yeah.
And then economic freedom fighters did not have any ward councillor. They did not vote for, for any ward councillor. But they ended up with 8 representatives from the list of, the party list. Here I'm talking about the party list. So they chose, the party chose, not that the voters chose, but the party chose 8 people to represent them. So you can see it goes like that. Eventually for independent, there was none, even list nothing. And so the table continues. Let's move to the next section. Okay. So as had been mentioned earlier on, we realize that different types of electoral system affect voters in different ways because they shape direction and intensity of competition between the parties as they operate within and around the rules in order to increase their chances of success. So if we look at that list of parties, we realize that, like many people in South Africa belong to NC. Then some DA and others, EFF. But how come when it comes to the party list, there were only 15 and DA had more? So what we are looking at, could it be that it is the electoral systems that influence the voter turnout? And we are saying that maybe, NC members feel that, no, we have already won. We don't even have to go to vote. There are many people who are going to represent me there. My neighbor is an ANC member. So and so is an ANC member. So if they have gone, I don't need to go. We have already won. EFF has got very few candidates. And then for the smaller parties, others, they feel like, even if I vote or I don't vote, it will not make a difference. We have already lost. So my presence there will my vote will not count. So those are some of the attitudes that voters tend to have. We can also indicate that electoral system favor larger parties generally. When we talk of campaigns, campaign is a very expensive exercise. And many a times those who have resources are the ones who can afford to campaign effectively. Even though they say you can spend up to this amount in the elections. But the truth is the larger parties have financial muscle. So they are able to even, even transport voters. If I know this one is going to vote for me, if my party is rich, then I can afford to transport them. Just before elections, I can, afford to grade the road so that, they service delivery. We grade roads and then the electorate will vote for us, which the smaller parties cannot afford to do. So they are not able to lure voters. Then the mixed electoral system sharpen the constraints and incentives of political parties and the voters in participate. That is still aligns to the first one, the second point there. Then the PR system seemed to have had a depressing effect on turnout in Buffalo City, as all the variables affiliated in it have negative coefficients. So that is the same disparity that I talked about, where we have more elected representatives, but the opposite for the list. The next slide. Okay, so just to conclude, so these are the conclusions that we made after that study. we concluded that electoral systems present participating political parties with unique challenges and opportunities. So for some parties, especially the smaller parties, there are more challenges than opportunities. For the bigger parties, there are more opportunities than challenges. So those who have more opportunities definitely win. And their members also turn out in large numbers. They are able to get the members to turn out and vote. Then smaller parties and their supporters did not take full advantage of the PR system that gave them an advantage to compete. If you look at one of the advantages of the PR system, or the proponents of PR system indicate that PR system, or the proportional representative, allows everybody to take part in the election. But what we are seeing here is not the case. It's like when it comes to the implementation, it is not as it should be. The paper is not corresponding with what we are seeing in practice. So this PR that is supposed to make everyone or encourage everyone to go and vote did not work with the Buffalo Metro. And I'm not wrong to conclude that it could be the same with all the other areas in the country. Then electoral system used in 2016 Buffalo City municipal elections promoted a dominant party system. And there is the fear that this could lead to government ineffectiveness. Because if somebody knows that no matter what I do, they'll still elect me, I'll still win the elections, then it means the people we elect might relax and not provide us with the services that we need. My colleague alluded to some of the issues that we've been facing, things like violence, police brutality, and things like that. It's because the bigger parties sometimes tend to relax because they I will still go back to office no matter what we do. And then our one of the recommendations is that proportion of seats allocated to these parties to the proportional system should be increased. Currently, it is 50%. So there is that proposal that it needs to be increased to 80% so that even the smallest parties, the independent candidates, are all taken care of. And that way, even the voters. And then the other recommendation is that this list, the ANC list, the DA list, the EFF list, whichever party list, should be an open list. So what we mean by open list is that the voters should have a say on who is included in this list, because at the moment it is the delegates who decide. So the people at the top there just sit and say, oh, this one is my friend, he must be on this list. No. But for us, we just wait on that voting days when we go to and see the list, and then I'm an ANC member, so I'm voting for ANC. I'm an EFF member, I'm voting for EFF as a party. And that could be one of the reasons why people are discouraged. So to avoid that and to encourage people to go and vote, then it is better that voters also take part in deciding who is on that list. And that way, I'm sure even the different areas will be represented, because there's no need of me having somebody from another area representing me just because they are members of ANC or members of DA. So that is where I'll stop with those two recommendations.
Thank you, ma'am. Just before I hand over to the next speaker, I have a question for you. So you've highlighted a few factors that influence the lack of voter participation, right? So I'm wondering if do political parties have any influence through campaigning in mobilizing participation and voter turnout? And this is not just for Buffalo City, just as an overall reflection in South Africa, that the way in which political parties campaign, does it in any way have an impact in mobilizing voter participation and support? Do we have like case studies or empirical evidence which proves that within regions where there's high level of campaign and mobilization from political parties, do we see a trend of an increase in voter turnout? Or in regions where political parties generally don't prioritize those regions in terms of their campaigning and mobilizing support, do we see a trend of a significantly lower voter turnout?
Yes. So for example, if you look at Buffalo City, we have Zwelitsha, which is predominantly Black people, and also Mdansane. So just before elections, those areas are very, very active. There's a lot of movement. Politicians are busy campaigning. So those who have resources like ANC will definitely win in such areas. They'll get more votes in such areas.
So it's also an issue of how not just the state, but political parties itself deem other regions to be strategically important.
Yes, the numbers.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. I think this is a very, very extensive reflection. And I think some of the things that you have highlighted aren't just for Buffalo City in particular. Like I mentioned earlier, that generally people aren't voting because of their lack of trust in the government of the day. And you also noted that generally an interest in politics. For some of us, I mean, I grew up in student politics. I still don't know how I ended up not in mainstream politics, because I was at Comrade at SASCO when I was in varsity. And so I've always been particularly interested in politics. But when I see some of my family members who have not really engaged with politics largely, elections for them it's a holiday. The election day for them is a holiday. And I think it's important for us to constantly keep having conversations around the importance of voting. And Spamandla, before I hand over to Mr. Mkolisi, I'm assuming that you still fall under the criteria of young people. If you don't, pardon me.
Sure.
But I think one of the important questions that we really need to think about, research suggests that South African youth are frustrated by formal processes as such as elections, and generally do not believe that they bear any fruit. So why do we constantly need to go to the polls if we aren't seeing any results because of the disillusionment that exists among young people? So I'm trying to figure out that also two questions, one being that the importance of civic education, and it links to what Dr. Florence has just spoken about interest in politics. So the importance of civic education in ensuring that South Africans actually engage with the state and electoral processes in that way.
Yeah.
That's number one. But number two, and this is and I'm asking this question in the most basic and simplest form. How do we get young people to vote? Because the majority of the population in this country is young people, and not just for South Africa. Africa has about 60% of the young population.
Yeah.
So if we're going to have a 60% of population of people who aren't voting, then that means our democracy is at risk, right?
Definitely.
And this can't be a trend that we keep ignoring. Then what do we do as civil society? And what are some of the recommendations we need to put forward to the state to say, hey, we actually have a problem here?
Yeah, thank you so much, Bonolo. As someone who still falls under that category, I think it's important, the first part on civic education, and I'm glad to see our partners here in civil society who do a lot of work in various communities to try and encourage participation in the system. The thing that I think that's failed us, and even us as UTDP, based on the ways in which our funding cycles are lined up, is the fact that we didn't have an electoral reform conversation in 2018. We didn't have an electoral reform conversation in 2017 because those weren't election years, right? So the problem with civic education and the ways in which it's been crafted is that we think that civic education quite often is left in the time at which we need to start educating voters to go to the polls. Whereas civic education is not about going to the polls only, but it's about how do we access other avenues in order to empower citizens to do the things that they ought to do to keep those that they've put into power accountable, but also to give them the tools to be able to make an assessment about the quality of leadership that's currently in place. So most of the stuff that we talk about in community is quite anecdotal about our councillor is not doing anything, he's not hosting meetings, all of that sort of stuff. But it's anecdotal because we're exhausted by the systems that seem to try to exclude us. So the ways in which community meetings, for instance, for young people in particular, the ways we hold our meetings are not necessarily the ways in which young people would like to engage. And so how do we imagine those spaces in order to encourage the level of participation for young people? Even me about politics, I think I might have ended up in a political party at some point, but then I was part of some structures at universities. And the thing is, as soon as I got into a structure that was politicized in one way or the other, I was frustrated because I was just like, but guys, show order, Madam Chair, all of these things, they are things that are procedural in the ways in which we conduct our politics, but they don't have any effect on the substance of that meeting. So if we meet to talk about a number of things, get to that place. Stop telling me about exigency when there's no real fire happening. Or exigency is only meant to be called when there's a real issue that's burning. But because the political education in this country is such that all we're educating our young people is just support my party without any real interrogation about the substance of that party. It means that they start adopting things because they want to be attracted to the mother body. And when they do that, then they also lose the value systems within which they entered into the space of leadership within community, leadership within that constituency university. So civic education for us needs to be shifted. We need to reprioritize the ways in which we engage citizens outside of election years. That's a very important part for the first part of the question. And the second part is how do we get young people to vote? Is when we think about re-engineering the system in favor of, before I even get to that one, the first thing I'll say is that I don't think, based on my assessment of the ways in which South African politics is set up, is that politicians and political parties are genuinely invested in the youth votes. They don't necessarily care about what young people have to say. There's two parts to this. The first is think about the fact that youth movements in particular are at the periphery of our political systems. It's like having a woman's wing. Why do we have a woman's wing? Why do we have a youth wing? Why aren't those constituencies the main agenda of our political system? So if we denigrate and we say, Youth League is for young people must then brief us. Who is us that young people are briefing? Why are young people not talking amongst themselves? Why is the leadership needing to reflect a specific demographic? And then only like secondary to that, we'll think about, percentage-wise, we don't have enough young people in this panel, so we'll co-opt and they'll become like an additional member. We don't have enough young people, so we'll co-opt and we'll have that one brave young person that we want to keep quiet from speaking outside and bring them inside and co-opt them in one way or the other, give them a position in government. They no longer have the same power and vigor to be able to fight us when they're outside. So those are the problems that's encountered within our political system. So when I say politicians aren't invested in the youth vote, it means that there's no real work that's being done outside of using young people as an opportunity to mobilize support for the party without actually saying, how do we use young people to reimagine the future of this political party? Political parties aren't in the space to innovate. Even the one that started in 2013, and we thought, I'm not seeing any real innovation at this point. So those are the things that I think I have to say. But what should we do? I don't know. That's the first thing. It's important to admit that even with young people, the multitude of issues that we face as well makes it difficult for us to come together. If you remember the Fees Must Fall movement as well, it became difficult to carry all of those intersectional parts of it, given the fact that we have so many diverse things that are important to us. So it's about saying, South Africa at the moment doesn't have a vision as a country. We have, sure, Vision 2013 and all of those that are in document form, but even that, a lot of people don't buy into the NDP, for instance. We have, some of us haven't even read the abridged version. I had to read it for work. I don't know if I'd have been interested if I wasn't employed in this space, you know, because it's a heavy document. But to also beyond that, what level of canvassing has the National Planning Commission done beyond the drafting of that document back in 2012?
2012.
So what level of engagement with communities around the NDP? We know that 2030 is coming just now. Do we have an assessment framework around how much of what we aimed to achieve from the NDPs was meant to be successful? First, the first vision that we had that was flawed was the idea of a rainbow nation without actual justice and redress. The second one then became the economic policy that came at the expense of employment, at the expense of the people on the ground. Around those years as well, we had a significant health crisis. Of course, that was helped by the change in leadership, and you know, we're happy with that because we've got the AIDS epidemic somewhat controlled in so far as the things that are being instituted by government. So there's just a lack of cohesion in terms of what our vision for this country is on all parts. We're sitting right now with an NHI for health-related purposes that we don't know where it's sitting at the moment because it's not a priority necessarily of the entire parliamentary caucus. It's not a priority even of the entire party that's leading government at the moment because of the nature of factionalism and how it seeps into the political discourse of the country. So we don't have anything common. It's just we're just happy to be in democracy. But the thing is, people are becoming frustrated, and the longer they become frustrated, especially for young people, we have very little to lose. We are unemployed. If we are employed, that employment is not meaningful and it's not gainful. So it means that even that job, I'm willing to lose it if it means I want to burn the country down and build something new. So that's what we ought to be careful about.
Yeah.
I
think largely from what I'm hearing you, like what I usually call the microwave freedom, the illusion of freedom that was essentially sold to us. So maybe we should change 27th of April and call it an Unfreedom Day, because then what does that look like? You know, we were set free from political oppression, but economically that didn't translate into anything.
So there's this debate that happens around these holidays, whether we call them celebrations or commemorations. So I don't know that we can celebrate, for instance, the 27th of April. We can commemorate. Nice. The Constitution, we voted. I mean, the first vote for the majority of South Africans was cast on that day. But can we celebrate it at this point if we were to be legitimately assessing the situation of South Africa?
I don't think we can. Did you want to say something, Dr. Collins?
I just wanted to add something that for me, I feel that there is need to introduce civic education in school as early as primary school. In some countries, they have history and civic education as a subject that is taught as from grade 4, you see. So we start from the basics. Otherwise, we wait until the dog is old, and it is hard to teach an old dog new tricks. So it's not easy.
No, you actually are right. If you look at the 2019 elections, so the report here says records of the 2019 elections show that there was a decrease of 9% in voter registration of new voters between the ages of 18 and 19. And a decrease of 9% in those aged between 20 and 29. And this is an indication that apathy starts at a very early age. So oftentimes we wait for young people to get to varsity. That's already late, right? And therefore we need to target them a bit more earlier. So I'm just going to hand over to, I think, Spamanda, let me go to you actually. And Spamanda is going to reflect on the importance of election observation. And I think generally, if we are to think about the role of election observation, is that one, it helps build up public confidence in the honesty of the electoral processes. Because you were there, you are not telling a story and say, Ubanbani said that to me. You were there exercising your right to ensure that the process is free, is fair, and it's credible. but also it just generally builds trust in the democratic processes, and it promotes and protects civil and political rights, because there are many ways for us to express and to have our political and civil rights realized. And one of them, especially again, if there's a lack of trust in the electoral process, if there's lack of trust in the government, participating as an electoral observer is important, because then what it does is that it encourages you not only just to have your political and civil rights realized, but you are part of the system, and therefore you can prove that you saw what happened. And so I'm gonna give you about 10 to 12 minutes to reflect on that.
No problem. Thank you so much, Bonolo. Again, good morning, colleagues. My name, as Bonolo has said, is Pamanda Mhlongo from the Democracy Development Program. And so when I thought about like what I wanted to talk about under observer missions, I just wanted to, as she indicated, let's talk first about the point. Why do observer missions, particularly in light of the fact that the IEC is relatively good at doing its work, right? We can't, I don't know if, unless if it's good to disagree as well, for the bulk of the work that the IEC undertakes on election day, on the special voting day and all of that, the administrative part of the IEC's work has been quite prestigious. Like it does a really good job. The secondary part of that is that the instruments with which we are able to carry any issues that come about as a result of some administrative error that might be occurring in the electoral process as well, has evolved quite significantly with the establishment of electoral courts and so forth. The ability for political parties to be part of the process through their party agents, observing the process of voting and so forth has also has improved the ability for trust to happen. But I think for us, what's important to reflect on as an organization whose work it is that we pride ourselves on is what, firstly, is the role of civil society in the space of elections and democracy building, particularly during election years. To what extent are we able to influence not the outcomes, but essentially what the aftermath is of whatever the election process is. And so those are the sort of tenets with which I'd like to approach this discussion. So on the first part is that we understand that there's a lot of work that goes into the electoral process itself, and that as civil society organizations, often it feels as though our work becomes somewhat periphery to the work of the election process itself. So it means that, for instance, the IEC now needs to take over, political parties will take over, then we ask ourselves, okay, then how do we support that process in a meaningful way to ensure that at the end of the day, the civil societies have had an opportunity then also to talk about what it is that was important for them in observing the election. When we observe the election process, we're not just observing the election day, but we're also observing all of the surrounding issues that come with elections. My colleague here, will be talking about the nature of violence monitoring, and in particular, he'll be talking about the discrepancies between service delivery protests that occur around that process, and what it means for the nature of violence, specifically here in KZN and the rest of the country, where it's been perceived as hotspots. But what we would like to say, in addition to some of those factors, is that there's also what we observe from political parties, the tendency to become somewhat belligerent in the approach to either voters who are coming to come and place their vote, or trying to create an opportunity for other politicians or political parties to come and contest in that space. If you look at the need for reform around what the Electoral Act was speaking about, insofar as should individuals be allowed, for instance, to be wearing political party hats, or rather shirts, when they come and cast their vote? There was a big debate in the past couple of years because of the nature of political violence and what might ensue, the level of victimization that voters themselves engage with at that point in time. The ability for political parties to campaign on election day as well has been significantly impacted upon in those instances, because of the nature of political influence. So some of us here in Durban will know and be quite affair with the idea that biryani is a thing that we expect every now and then during some campaigns of some political parties, which is fine. But it's a good thing that they see a need for us to eat on that specific day. But what's important also is that to what extent does that influence the ability of that person to freely and fairly cast a vote that they don't feel pressured into? So that's aside from the administrative part of the monitoring of the IEC's work, it's also about monitoring the political environment under which the elections themselves are taking place. So as civil society, I think we, as organizations who've existed in the movement for a free and democratic dispensation in South Africa, our work has been significant also in sustaining that free and democratic South Africa. In terms of assessing, firstly, to what extent are people being influenced unduly in the ways in which they conduct their lives? So to what extent are they then also impacted by things like corruption, maladministration, and then also what it means then for the sorts of lobbying that we have to undertake. You've seen a lot of instances where civil society organizations will undertake cases to the Constitutional Court, to the High Court, and so forth, in respect of preserving certain communities' rights in certain constituencies. So, for instance, Abahlali baseMjondolo have done a lot of work to ensure that people are not displaced in a way that's unfair and unprocedural, given the fact that spatial planning in our country has not been resolved. To what extent then does the issues affecting Abahlali baseMjondolo then have an impact on voting and electoral processes is something that we have to be able to account for in our process of observing those elections as civil society organizations. So beyond the fact that we agree and we understand that the IEC does good work in relation to that, what we also have to be able to assess and engage with is what is the nature of the political environment around that time. What we were engaged with yesterday with the IEC briefing, we also heard from organizations that work with people with disabilities, people living with disabilities in the country. So what it means that to what extent is access denied to certain people on the basis that, for instance, in this place right now, we're having very critical, important conversations, but we don't have a sign language interpreter, for instance. So the exclusion of certain groupings is also part of our assessment of whether we can actually call an election process free and fair in real terms. And I think for the purposes of the presentation, it's important for us to think about what are some of the barriers to access for all of our community constituencies. Dr. Florence Chisanya earlier on talked about what impacts voter turnout. And part of that, what she was talking about, is the institutional and cultural issues that people are affected with in those regards. To what extent are we able then to onboard some of those learnings as a result of our observation and say we will start to campaign more effectively for the policy shifts that are necessary in order to start creating an opportunity for more groups to participate freely and fairly in those respects. So those are some of the things that we ought to undertake and ought to understand about the electoral observation process. Our right to vote is guaranteed, but it seems as quite often that there could be many factors that impact on our inability to participate meaningfully in that space. And as civil society, then, what is our role in ensuring that whilst we are engaged in the process of observation, we try and create less red tape, we try and engage on a diplomatic level with all of the institutions that are engaged with the process of creating and forming elections and electoral processes along the way. I'm happy that there are some organizations here as well who will be commenting on that and who will be commenting specifically on that process and specifically on ideas about what projects do we need to undertake in order to ensure that the electoral process is as inclusive as possible. And when we look at the importance of such things for local government elections in particular, quite often local government has the issue of not having as high a turnout as the national and provincial election, just because political parties decide, okay, we won't spend as much of a budget on these ones for whatever reason, because guaranteeing seats at National Assembly is possibly more important than guaranteeing representation in a rural environment, for instance. So we need to also engage with why political parties make those decisions, because it has significant impact on the quality and levels of engagement with those local municipalities, the services that people are provided with, the level of accountability that people are able to have from political parties in that space is also quite significant, because it means whilst people say councillors are great because we can put a face to the party they're based most of the time in our community, it's also quite significant that communities feel like they don't have the ability to actually change who their political party representative in that space is. People would rather protest on election day instead of having because they haven't had an opportunity to decide who is represented in those spaces. So when we decide to do our observation work, then all of those elements need to be taken into account. And it's important then to make an assessment at the end of the day is, for ourselves as civil society organizations, what is the benchmark that we ought to set in the process of being engaged, not only in civic education, but in the process of election work as a theme? Because if we have no ability to assess our impact, if we rely on saying, for instance, that if the ANC didn't campaign here, therefore that's why there's lower voter turnout, are we doing justice in terms of what we set ourselves up for pre-1994? Are we happy with where things are right now? Because for us as the DDP, the electoral observation, yes, the administrative part of the IEC's work is important, but what's more important is also an assessment of the impact of civil society's voice in the spaces where we should be campaigning and asking for more, both in terms of policy change, but also in terms of just respect for the citizen, insofar as how politicians engage with the citizen, whether it be campaigning or the work that happens after campaigning, insofar as service delivery and actual being held accountable. I think I'll stop there for now.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
So amid COVID-19 last year, we saw quite a lot of elections in Africa, Malawi, Mali, Burundi, right? Burundi generally made a bad case study because they went on elections right at the peak of COVID-19. But what was interesting with Burundi in terms of voter observation, obviously because of restrictions that were brought forward by lockdown, there were no international observers. But what the president of Burundi did, and this is where I want you to comment on. What he then did was, so while on an international scale, opportunities could have been provided for international observers, right? He then decided that he doesn't want to see international observers in his country and only invited the East African Legislative Assembly, because those are his cronies, right? And so there's always this thing where we do a procedural approval. So there were observers, but there were, and then we tick that. But the question is that who was there observing? Because at the heart of it is that if you're going to get your cronies to come tick the fact that we were observers, that does not speak about free, fair, and transparent elections. So to what extent how do we find ways to mitigate the corruption that exists in making ourselves look like we are following the protocols that have been put forward?
Yeah.
Again, it brings the conversation about political clientelism. Civil society organizations are struggling, right? And because we are struggling, sometimes we find ourselves in awkward positions with donors. And if donors have a particular interest in the political landscape of a country, it means that they could explore any other alternative to make sure that they push forward their mandate. So what are some of the regulatory framework that exists in spaces of observation to ensure that there aren't any corruption and malpractices that exist?
Okay, so this is a dicey one. So it's difficult for South Africans, for instance, to, what I'm saying is, in future, if there were to be someone who decides to take away power in our country and does so through some weird things in the IEC, it would be difficult to make a genuine assessment of the credibility of the elections, given that what is the word? Accreditation is something that we get from the IEC. So as an organization, if you want to become an electoral observer, you have to apply to the IEC in order to be able to get your observer status and be given the opportunity to be in those spaces. So in a similar way, for instance, in our other African countries, the likelihood of the IEC, for instance, being in collusion of sorts with a leading political parties is quite high in instances when there's a legitimate swing for power, if people are really trying to take things over. So then it means that for the longest of times, for as civil society, then it's not there aren't existing practices, for instance, that we can say that it's legislated that as a civil society organization you hold yourself accountable in these ways. But it's about what values are we able to set up for ourselves to prevent any future instance of us being considered to be aligning to a specific mandate from one way or the other. The thing that's happened, unfortunately, with the ways in which our elections have been going, international donors think that we're doing all right. Funders, for instance, don't make necessarily the amount of resources available in to push election observer missions to the extent that we would like it to happen, because they think that there've been no problems cited in South Africa. So because there's no problems, we'd rather go somewhere else. It could also be that they decide we no longer have an interest in South Africa because we're deciding we want to do something else in South Africa in other insidious ways. That could be another thing as well. But the idea is that because of there's an absence of funding, it also means that there's no motivation for most civil society partners to actually think about setting up that sort of system that holds them accountable outside of the existing institutions, because we shouldn't. I feel that there should be a civil society organization or forum that holds up. So we have really good institutions in South Africa, like ASA. Your KZNCC does really good work when it comes to observation as well. But there are instances when certain individuals from some of those organizations, not necessarily ASA, can be thought to be speaking from a party line because they are affiliated in one way or the other. So it becomes dicey for us to be in partnership. But it then creates an instance of saying, what do we need to do? What is the sort of code of conduct? What are sort of the agreements and MOUs that we need to put in place for ourselves that are values-based as a civil society movements in order to keep us away from the potential of that happening? What I think we need to be also careful of, and so that's why it was like a catch-22 with the Burundi example, because it's like, I see, I'm not a fan of international observer missions anyways, because I don't know why they're here. But at the same time, it's also the idea of cronyism becoming a significant thing in countries where there's no real a regulation of power. So that becomes an issue as well. But yeah, that's essentially where I'm at.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think it's important from a civil society's perspective for us to think about our own frameworks and mechanisms and how we govern the space, and particularly also with the international, because I think one of the challenges in Africa is how we give international partners too much power. Because then the question I asked, particularly in Burundi, then it says that one could say that I'm suggesting that the lack of participation of international observers
means that there will be something bad happening.
Exactly, which is not necessarily the case. And I think through the history of how Africa has been engaging with the West, we need to constantly take ourselves from that level of engagement with the West, but equally recognizing that there's a place for them. But it doesn't mean that their participation affirms our democracy or lack of it thereof. Yeah. Thank you, Spamandla. So I'm going to hand over to Mr. Olisi Nyoswa. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, sir. He's going to reflect on local government in KZN and the history of violent protest. And while you do that, I have a question for you, maybe before you get to your presentation. And this is something that I alluded earlier when I was making my introductory remarks, that given the rise of police brutality in the world, and in the continent largely, and we see that also in South Africa towards protesters. Does this have a chilling effect on alternative participation, such as protest actions? Because then why am I going to protest if I'm putting my life in danger? So how do we imagine, and I'm asking this question based on the police report that came out, the police report that was speaking about how police should find ways to manage the crowd without having to use violence. So how, in this area particularly, how do you imagine the role of the state transforming and the need to balance crowd control versus freedom of expression and the right to freedom of assembly? Because it is our right to political participation, it is our right to protest, it is our right to freedom of assembly if we see that things are not working the way they ought to be. So the fact that the state constantly in South Africa, like I remember when again, whether we were celebrating or commemorating Human Rights Day, for me it was awkward and ironic that how do I celebrate Human Rights Day when this came out because of police brutality during apartheid, and yet right in post-apartheid government, we still are seeing police brutality. So you don't have to answer the question now, but in your presentation, even towards the end, help us think about ways in which the state can really transform in this area, particularly the police, and that how do we put policies and framework that binds the police to one, as they do crowd control. They don't do that through violence and also contravening our right to freedom of expression and assembly.
Very interesting. You are asking about the police, and I'm just thinking about what line is Bonolo in now, because I thought that she is in this sector of ours. This is exactly what is covered in the presentation. So the presentation is talking about the role of the police, or what should be the role of the police. So you are covered. Okay. You will hear as we go along. Good people, good morning. So happy to see you during this time. You see, there are faces that are familiar that I'm seeing. You see, if you haven't seen a friend of yours, a colleague of yours, for a period of a week or two, well, you worry whether a person is history or is still around. So thank you very much that good people you are around. You are one of those people who survived. So some of us have been infected and healed without knowing that they were at some stage positive. So it is grace that we are still around. So thank you very much. Well, on a different note, there was a kind of a youth engagement which really brought butterflies in my stomach, and they were asking about the youth being ignored by Bonolo, whom I suspect that you are within that category.
Unfortunately not.
Hey, madam, you cannot judge it by its cover. And when you were referring to the one that I think is escaping that category, so, well, really, it was quite a very interesting discussion. And if you were to ask me, how did I feel about your conversation? I would have said to you, I felt one, old, two, scared. You see, scared, maybe there's a third one, guilty as well. So, because unfortunately you cannot go back and correct things that have been wronged in the immediate past by the powers to be. So the first part of the feeling, which is old, I've just witnessed it before the start of this session. If you can read quite clearly on the board, you can tell where are we with this session. Where is this session held? According to the presentation, this is held at Blue Waters, yet we are here at Elangeni. So I spent my few minutes sitting very nicely, comfortably in one of the conference rooms where I was waiting for people to walk in. And I was so surprised that the manager, who was so much generous, came to me with a little box of chocolates and some bunch of flowers, saying that, thank you very much, sir. You see, we don't normally have daddies coming to the baby showers of their children. So really, you are showing love before the child is born. So, well, yes, part of my work includes promoting first 1,000 days of the child and the role of the father. But this morning, I was not into that. I just went into the wrong venue, wrong hotel, where the baby shower is about to start. And I saw ladies who were walking in wearing the same colors. And I was the only one. What is wrong with me? Well, so then when I was saying that the discussion made me feel old, really, it has been proven before it was taken. People, we are not talking about baby showers here. We are not talking about babies. We are going to talk about local government, the history of violent contestation in KwaZulu-Natal. KwaZulu-Natal, which is known as one of the most influential provinces in the country. So when KZN sneezes, the whole country catches the flu. So everything happens in the province. So people really remember not long ago when the king was going to be laid to rest. So something was happening in the province, and it really it affected what was happening in the country as a whole. It was the burying of Ongangezwelakhe, King Zwelithini. But we started hearing people, even on social media, talking about Amabuto, talking about certain figures that were there, and so on. So if things are happening in the province, I'm telling you, the whole country will shake. So as we are talking about government elections, so there is always interest, even during elections, as you were listening to the presentation here, the voter turnout is much better comparatively, if you look at other provinces. And the international observers, they like to come to this part, especially coastal. Very few will go more inland. So KZN is a very influential province. So therefore, I'm going to share these few slides with you, which are based on the experience that we have had in the past 14 years working with DDP in the whole field of elections. So our work has not been narrowed down to violence monitoring. So I was so happy when Florence was talking about other aspects of elections. If we had an electoral cycle in front of us, we'll see that it's not only about voting, it's not only about observation, it's not only about mediation, there are other things that are going on. And one was asking, what is IEC doing when it's not the 27th of October? So do they start on the 26th to work? Unfortunately, it is work throughout. There are so many things that are happening behind the scenes. And Spa was talking about even civic education coming on the eve or closer to elections. So these are the things that many organizations like DDP are doing it on an ongoing basis. People know very well what to do. So my presentation will look into these few things, just a brief introduction on violence monitoring that was done, the work that was done in KZN, why violence monitoring of the all aspects of voting, training involved in the work, new patterns emerging. If the state is doing enough, Bonolo, to understand and respond to violence, what avenues are available to propose solutions and policy proposals for violence monitoring work? Which institutions are also targets of our work? Residual effects of residual effects of violence epochs in KZN, and we conclude. These are very short slides. We are going to get this done in no time. So please don't be tired before you even see the first slide. So look at the first one, it's very short. I am saying that this is going to be a narrative of the personal experience in the past decade and a couple of years. Myself, the organization and the consortium, which is called KwaZulu-Natal Democracy and Elections Forum, which is, I will say, a mother or a father. I don't want to say a father now. So, which embodies at least 20 organizations in the province whose work is around democracy. So they've been part of it, doing work that is related to violence. So together within the KZNDF, including DDP, we've been doing the work that we are talking about, especially all aspects of work where each organization is allocated a task to perform. So, well, the experience that one is sharing is based on that what we have been doing. So as we are saying, our focus is KwaZulu-Natal. We have indicated that elections, if they are happening in October, it does not mean that we must start waking up in August, in September. So work starts way before. As we can see now, we are here. DDP is always a pace setter, setting the pace that we start early enough. It was only last week that the announcement was made, but now we are having this discussion. So this is very powerful. Long ago, we used to start a month or two before. So now we are starting 5 months, 6 months before the actual election day. So this is just a one-day event that we are talking about, but it takes half a year by some organizations. Yet there is something that is also going on throughout the course of the year. This is quite beautiful. Through partnership with DDP, so we've been doing work on violence monitoring. So I will just focus on the recent one, which is the local government elections that we had and also the previous national government election. We've been working with DDP on the very same aspect of our elections. So there are other areas that we've been working in the past, and that was not only the first time that we've been working together. It dates back since the first democratic election that was held in South Africa. This was a result of the lessons learned during 2016 local government elections, where more than 20 politicians died before elections. So those are the ugly scenes that we hear of, we witness, where politicians lose their lives before elections. Then we start asking questions, whether is it political violence? There were questions when you see people dying, especially during or just before elections. A person died near the tuck shop, only to find that the person was breaking into the tuck shop and was shot. Perhaps that person happened to be a councillor. We have heard of cases in some parts of this province where certain councillors have been found involved in the stock theft. Others were involved in all sorts of criminal activities. And if a person has been shot dead, so people will always say that it's electoral violence, it's election related. It is not. So as we were doing this part, we had a team of, we started with 28 monitors deployed all over the province in areas that are called hotspots. Hotspots are previously those areas that were traditionally known as areas of violence where people are killed all the time. You talk of places like the hostels, you talk of Escort, you talk of eThekwini. So you go to Lundi, Nongoma, where there's always contestations, people fight, killings are happening. So when we're doing the recruitment, we will look particularly into those areas, whether there are people coming in those areas. So coming to why violence monitoring? Why violence monitoring? KZN has history of political violence dating back in the 90s. I'm not going to dwell on that one. Some of us were still around. Some of us were still at high school. Some of us really were still crawling to understand. They just arrived, but to understand what is happening in the world around them. So during that era, killings were still politically motivated, but not like in the pre-94 era, where they were mainly about inter-party violence. So this is what we were familiar with during those times. We were having one party fighting the other. Some will remember when you go to certain parts in Umlazi, hostels in particular, you wear a particular t-shirt written or have a face of somebody else. So that's a call for death, nothing else. You are likely to die because you have a t-shirt with somebody else who will not support. And same thing in other areas. So those were the things that were being experienced. So it was inter-party because you believe you are from a different party. You differ in terms of political affiliation, beliefs, and so on. Even other things, if you see a woman wearing pants, so that woman is associated with a political party. So if you see a person wearing a tie, you are known that which party do you belong to. So there were those myths that people had during those times. So there was the time, those were times of inter-party violence. KZN has been experiencing intra-party conflicts, which were related to power and money. We were lucky to give testimony to Mwerane Commission, where we were looking at the causes of violence. So, and after people have been saying so many things about votes and other things, we realize that it's not about votes. It is not about the fact that you belong in a different political party, but it was about money and power. People, they will know that if you have power, you have decision-making in that party, which may take you somewhere. So within one political party, then our intervention as CSOs was based on the premise that, Therefore, the work that we were doing as the civil society was to contribute to free, fair, and peaceful elections, which focus particularly to traditional hotspot areas, as we have been mentioning, not only hotspots, because hotspots kept on changing. Today, you think that the city center is the hotspot. You'll find that in Stenga, Guatuguza, 2 people have been killed, or maybe a particular local municipality has been closed, and so on. Then that becomes the hotspot. That is why our recruitment will target not only traditionally hotspot areas, even potential hotspot areas, based on the work, based on the feedback that comes from monitors whom will meet on monthly basis, not only to give report, they will be trained every month. They will use the reports gathered to get some more information and see what other ways of interventions will be done to ensure that we minimize the occurrence of violence. So then that was done through, well, I'm not tall enough. I think it won't harm me to stand. So, okay. Thank you very much. Is it on already?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So all this was done through proactively monitoring violence in potential hotspot areas. So we have said proactively, because you don't have to wait for the house to burn, then you start insuring it. So you do have to act proactively. Troubleshooting potential problem areas. The troubleshooting was done by the monitors who have been trained using the toolkit that was used originally in Nigeria when they were conducting elections. Further,
reviewed and used by Electoral Monitoring Network in Cape Town, where they were looking at causes of violence, looking at the early warning signs. That was part of the curriculum, as well as linking up with other relevant stakeholders, including security forces, to minimize the probability of escalating of political or election-related violence in KZN. So, well, here we were not just in isolation as the civil society movement. We were working with security forces. We were working with the police. So you speak in a prophetic voice. So this is what I've been talking about. This is just the start of it. So we work with them, not only working with them, bringing them on board, but also, even if they have been trained for the whole period to push the crowds, to make sure that they maintain order, they spray people with water, they throw tear gas and the stuff. But we know that as people have been working on elections, it is essential that they get on board and understand elections and understand the work that we do and understand the correct way of intervention so that they cannot just push people away. So they will have the understanding of the work that the people are doing. So then talking about the training, which I have touched a bit on, the training and recruitment of monitors. I've said that they were taken from hotspot areas. That was not the decision of one Mxolisi Nyuswa who was coordinating this discipline in the province, but we know that our region is divided into our province is divided into 5 regions, and each region has a footprint of an organization that is part of the provincial forum, which makes it easier for you to tell us what is the trouble that you get there, which particular village, which ward, and so on. And you bring all those here at the provincial desk. Then when we deploy, when we work according to the plan informed by people spread throughout the province. Monitors were drawn from CSOs, working in the space of elections and democracy. Religious community and others were ordinary community members who were recruited based on their knowledge of the hotspot in question. I've said that key areas that were covered during the training that was conducted on monthly basis. As DDP is doing now, this is not new. Even during that time, we will start waking up at least 6 months before elections, just to prepare to do work that is geared towards the election that is coming at that time. So our curriculum will look at things like electoral competitions, analyzing conflict, tracking conflict, conflict intervention, as well as reporting. Those were some of the key areas that were part of our curriculum with the monitors that were coming from all over. I want to say with confidence that traditionally, when you talk of monitors, you'll think of a person who is fit, tall, and strong. Not necessarily. Well, that person happened to be a male for that matter. So we try to make sure that even a person who is tiny and not so tall is part of it. A person who is not in a particular sector is also on board. So the youth was dominant here, but previously there was no youth involvement in this work. It was mainly religious leaders. It was mainly people in the community, except politicians, but things changed completely. I wish I have a picture of the team of monitors that we work with. So some of them were still there. You cannot get rid of them completely, but they were still there, but it was not 100% the list of religious leaders. People in the NGO sector, they were there. People coming from those communities, they were there, because it gives you a much more confidence and courage to see what is happening in your own area. You are well informed, you are the expert of your own area. So bring that here when we come to meet provincially so that we know what to do. Key stakeholders were now and again invited to do socio-political analysis of the province. Here we talk of IEC coming on board, coming to say that this is what you are doing. This is how we want it to be done. We want what you do to please modify here and there, bringing the experts on those areas that we are talking about, bringing people from the institutions of higher learning to come and be here, like we used to have Luko Namgoni from UKZN. A lot will have Dr. Shlongwane coming to bring some value to the process. So to make sure that people are up to date all the time. So then now the question, were there any shifts if you look at the remote previous elections as well as those up to 2016, 2018, 2019. So there was a shift from inter-party into intra-party conflicts and killings. So I have mentioned that previously it was people between political parties, among political parties killing each other, but now it's something happening within the party itself. We are in the meeting today. We do not agree. Keep quiet. We know where you sleep. We know how you get there. So then things happen. And that's a person who knows your profile quite well. So those are new patterns that emerged. Fewer arrests and no convictions. So this is a very sad story. You remember that we recorded before elections in 2016, there were 20 councillors who had been killed, and there was no arrest and there was no conviction. A killer will see the sun, will go to bed freely, the life will be normal. So, and the commission of inquiry will be set. See, commission of inquiries are always there. You have COVID money squandered and stolen, then they will say, we'll set up the commission of inquiry to investigate. Because the only man that is left, there is nothing left for PPEs. What is left is just to set up the commission of inquiry so that we investigate about what happened to the money. So those are some of the experiences that we have. Bringing key stakeholders on board. So I've mentioned that we have UKZN as part of the process. We have invited IEC to be part of those meetings, those trainings with the monitors. Then there was one constructive criticism that was said by the chairperson of the House of Traditional Leaders in the province, Nkosi Chiliza, when we were in Ukozi giving the feedback after testifying in the Mwerana Commission. He said, Nyuswa, you are doing very well, but what I do not like is the fact that everything that is happening, you'll find that a portion of the killings happen in the village. So challenges that are experienced conflicts, they happen in the village, but we are not involved as Amakos. We are not told of anything, yet our interventions might be making a difference, who knows? So, well, I took that very seriously because the Amakosi, they are the custodians of people in that particular area. They are the eye. There were things that were not even taken to court, but dealt with within that kind of environment. Unfortunately, our work area did not involve them, but now they are part of it. You'll hear as we go along, spreading political dialogues to reach deep rural areas of the province. So that's another new pattern that emerged. Most of the political dialogues, you'll remember that they happen under this roof. They will happen here in the evening. So for those people really who are staying in and around Etewe, so if I'm staying if I'm staying at Inganini, if I'm staying at other areas that are way out of the city center, what is this saying? Unfortunately, you cannot put that blame on one organization, yet the civil society is quite broad in this province. But the pattern that they took to change was that let us not hold political dialogues here only. Votes also come from other parts of the province where you have membership as a political party. So what we have done, we have taken that call seriously. In 2018, we started to have political dialogues in deep rural areas. and they went very well. And the presence of the traditional leaders was amazing. Of about 9 that were conducted during that year, I think I handled 7. Of the 7 where I was, there was a traditional leader. Where there was noise, imagine, even if you are wearing a particular color of your shirt that shows your political party, but when your traditional leader is there, actually he knows your mother. So you see, he knows your place, and nobody wants to part ways with his cow. I mean, if you have done something violating what the Inkosi has said, you might be fined a cow. So therefore, your behavior is really there to save your family, not just yourself. So that is why the way in which those dialogues were facilitated and political parties expressing themselves, it was very exciting. And you'll see parties contesting before, during, and after the dialogue. Sometimes they forget, they stand up and then start talking, not what is being discussed here, but about election. But everything was done without any harm to anyone. So, well, recruiting diversely, as I have indicated, that we had young and old, experienced, and people who are still gathering their experience on this, because training was going to be there, men and women. And also the other thing that we need to improve on, so violence monitoring is not the business of a particular racial group. So we started to beef up to have not only people who are speaking isiZulu, KwaZulu-Natal, not only people who have such a skin, but just to have that mixture. We started to see even at Marian Ridge, we have monitors there. We have people who are not necessarily speaking a different language, but I mean, not necessarily speaking isiZulu, but people who come from areas where there are problems, because problems are there all over, but the extent is not the same. Then is the state doing enough to understand and respond to violence? This is the question. As indicated earlier, there were very few arrests and no conviction, so we cannot say much about that. Reports from monitors about SEP's presence during rallies and political gatherings, including funerals of political figures, were always impressive. There was heavy police presence during funerals, especially where a politician is going to be laid to rest. Sadly, the state didn't invest enough on peace building processes. Instead, it was ISIS and IEC in the previous elections that invested in the previous processes. The state investment was solely on responding. Once there is fire, people are killing each other there, you jump, you go there. So I'm glad that now we can boast to have worked with structures that are promoting peace, that are part of the peace building processes. And that is the European Center for Electoral Support, where the civil society here worked very hard in this room, training the police on the work that we are doing as civil society, so that when they go out there, they know very well the culture, they know the music that we sing here, so that we work together. Nobody's on the other side of the river and the other is here. So therefore, that helped to ensure that elections were flowing quite peacefully. The state invested more on responding to political violence rather than preventing it, so that all what we are saying. What avenues are available to promote solutions and policy proposals for violence monitoring work? KZN has solutions to their own challenges. So these are some of the challenges putting pressure on the government to arrest perpetrators. We have stated problems. This is what we want to see, where there is pressure that is put. Invest on intensive training of mediators and monitors. All aspects of elections as they appear in the electoral cycle, from pre, during, and post, elections must be linked to each other. So we were talking about voter education, civic education, polls observation, mediation, conflict resolution, konke, let it be seen working together. Let us not treat aspects independently. So let us not have them operating in isolation. Election monitoring must be in each and every phase of the electoral cycle. Electoral cycle runs for 5 years. So we wanted to see this part, election monitoring, being there in each and every stage and phase of the cycle. Then establish regional or local monitoring forums made up of traditional leaders as well, community, SEPs, and etc. I'm glad that in the North, this is what they have started. It was started immediately after the elections. Formalize relationship with key stakeholders like universities, IEC, and government departments so that we have a comprehensive view of the issues. So which institutions are close targets of our work? So these are partners, they have been mentioned. IEC mentioned traditional leadership, religious groups, SEPs, civil societies, institutions of higher learning, as well as media. So for us to have success, these are very key. Almost done. There is residual effect, residual effects of violence, epochs in KZN. Well, unfortunately, violence does not bring good results. There are no good effects, no comprehensive assessment of the residual effects of violence in KZN during and post. So, however, the National Treasury had to put aside additional resources for the deployment of extra law personnel to ensure safety and security of the voters. But let us not forget peace processes that they need to invest to activities that need to be done before elections. The general health of the province is negatively affected as families live in fear for their members who are taking role in politics. So, well, that is the effects, the emotional effects of those families. So it's not good. Elections are no longer free and fair if voters are no longer exercising their democratic rights of choosing their leaders freely. Remember, Florence, presentation was talking about leaders chosen by the politicians themselves. So you have a councillor, but you never had a say. So unfortunately, things happen in that way. Today, KZN has the stigma of being called a violent province. That doesn't portray a good picture, whereas there are many other things that the province is known of rather than being a violent province. The above may, in the long run, affect the perception of the potential investors. As a result, investment may be lost. Conclusion, it is unequivocally clear that political violence during this era is to a large extent about who must eat. This is the main problem. We have violence monitoring as a mission, as an aspect of the electoral process, because the whole thing is about who must eat. That was put by one of the leaders just before elections. Therefore, intervention strategies need to look at the root cause, not the symptoms, but the root cause as to really why. Because people are not fighting off the votes as it used to be. Attention be given to the internal affairs of the political parties. It speaks to your presentation that let us look at what is happening within that party. Let me unpack that a little bit. That is to democratize, be transparent, adopt fair processes for internal party elections and so on. So those are the things that we have to see if they are really happening within those parties. I do not know that the presidents of the parties will allow that to happen. Transparency, democracy, fair processes. So that's a challenge, leaders. Ensure that the voices of all members are heard, respected, and considered in decision-making on the future of their political parties. It's very nice to have a say in your own political party. Let us look at this picture. This is what I was talking about. Well, it's a village, Deep Rural village in Eshowe, which is 150 km away from here. In this village, there is heavy presence of the traditional leadership in events that are happening, and they have to be impartial. they don't have to show any political affiliation, because when they speak and say no, they must be heard. People must be able to listen. So in this party, in this gathering, it was a dialogue which KRCC, the organization that had hosted it together with the IEC, so was saying that, guys, come together. Here is a space for you. Talk about what you want to do for people. What do you promise people of Ward 13? We want people to engage you. And they were saying their manifestos under one roof, and there was nothing. Well, if you see the chairs broken, it was not that they were flying, frightened. So people came, the chairs were like this. So, and the windows were broken. Not that people were pelting each other or what, but it was the way the hall was. So there was peace, but joy was there. The spirit was never discouraged by that. And that was not only the role of the civil society managing the situation quite well, the stakeholders that I spoke about. And the police were actually sleeping outside because they didn't have anything to do. So those are the challenges that we have to take such things from these white tables and then go somewhere, go to our local halls, churches, schools, and so on, and make people to feel what other people are feeling. So that when they participate meaningfully. And the level of voting in that particular area increased immensely after these dialogues. So those are the things that we need to do. And this is not a very expensive exercise. It is affordable because you have community resources that are available. Good people, thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to break a bit. I'll make a reflection on your presentation later. I'm just wondering if there are members of political parties in the room. Okay, great. So we're going to take 5 minutes break. There's coffee and snacks outside. You can grab them and come have them here. When you come back, please we'll open up a space for questions. And it will also be interesting to hear some reflections from members of the political parties. I think it will be great if any member of the parties can just come and flag with me that you are in the room. Either you have a question or I may have a question for you, just to know which political parties are represented. So let's take a 5 minutes break and grab something to drink and come back. Thank you.
So when we're grabbing something to drink, we're going to come and eat it here. We're not eating and talking outside, we're eating in here. Okay?
Oh, just
So Raymond Perrier, Dennis Hurley Center, that the guy with the team, he's doing work around campaigning and making sure that homeless people are registered for the election and all of that. So if you give him 5 minutes, so I'll write his name down from it. So should I WhatsApp it to you?
Can I read your handwriting?
Okay. It's Raymond Perrier. I'll just say, yeah. No. I'm going to say, EFS figure, I don't understand EFS. It's like they like being in spaces when you're not invited, but when they are invited, they choose exactly. Because they want to, when they're not invited, they want to come and say, we want to invite you to the meeting, whatever. Let's go.
Jen, you want to hook me up?
Yes, someone please.
Is it on?
I'm muted on that side.
So we got a lot of police.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Is it fine? Can you hear me? Hello? I feel like singing Lionel Richie's song. Is it me you're looking for? By show of hands, I want to just establish how many people in the room have questions. 1, 2, 3. Do we have the fourth one? Really? I've never been told that. Hello. Are we here? Welcome back. Again, by show of hands, how many people have questions? Only 3 questions. What is this, comrades? Are you ready for lunch? Okay. There shall be lunch, so do not worry, fret not. Okay, so I'm going to, so you can use the mics. Please don't hold them. Just stand next to the mic and ask your questions. So I'll ask the gentleman with the yellow T-shirt and the gentleman on that table. You can use that mic. And ma'am, you can use this mic here. Okay, and so we've got a 4th question, 5th question. Okay, so I'll give over to the gentleman with the yellow T-shirt. The 2 gentlemen on that table, you can ask after the.
Good morning. My name is Sanele Hatebe. I'm from Guamashu. From the youth sector in eThekwini. For me, it's, I don't know whether you're going to phrase it as questions, if you see the need to answer them, or you're going to see them as an opportunity to reflect and maybe respond at a later stage. Number 1, there's something that Dr. Shisanya was talking about, which to me is always a concern. With the now allowing for independent candidates to participate in the local elections, I always have this concern that independency is only reflected at local, at ward elections, but is not reflected at PR council. And I have this concern that because the councillors bring the matters of the community to the PR council, where then decisions are made for service delivery, how will that play out if there's an independent councillor who takes the matters to the council, to the PR council? Because we know the politics that exist. That would probably say, who's your constituency that you're bringing the matters to? Because you do not account to anyone in the PR council. You're not ANC, you're not DA, you're not EFF, you're not ACDP, you're not IFP. Who are you? Who are you bringing your matters to? And in order to make that system of independent councillor fail, they'll choke the independent councillor through not taking their matters of the community forward, so that the community will fight with the councillor, and it will prove this system of the independent councillor failing. And then they will come back and say, but we tried the independent councillor strategy and it failed. But not because it was supposed to fail, but because of the politics to choke it out of the system. That's my first observation and concern. And briefly, some things that Mr. Mhlongo, before I call him Bembu, Mr. Mhlongo said, I have this thing that you mentioned it, Brian, should political parties be campaigning outside of the voting district or the voting stations? Because that on its own is an intimidation, number one. Number two, it is an influence even to the person who already knows who they came to vote for. But because there's some conversations that people are actually stopped before they even enter the gates in the VD by these political parties, and they have things that they say to them, which then disturbs this whole democratic process. Again, there's recently an incident with Contralesa. Contralesa, who the president said of Contralesa, we are tapping out of the relationship with ANC because of whatever things that are going on between them that they were not happy about. And I'm looking at the influence of the traditional leadership in the community. That empowers votership, or that empowers the numbers of voters to actually go to the polls and vote. If Contralesa then says, in my community as a traditional leader, people will not vote, that's what will happen. Now I'm speaking to the influence in the voter turnout. And then, okay. And then this one that says, are citizens open to new leadership? Because remember in the 2019 elections, and I'm sorry I'm going to be name dropping because I'm civil society. Yeah, I'm okay to do that. The ANC knew coming to the 2019 elections, or they had anticipated losing power during the period, and they were quite surprised of the results when they found out that they won so many districts and provinces. Yes, they won so many provinces, and to me that said there are people who, even in this room, who will be complaining for 5 years of things not happening, and then when they get to the voting polls, they bring back the very same people who they were complaining about. And that seems to be a problem even in society in general, where people love this culture of complaining and yet doing nothing about it and bringing back the problem. Yeah, I'll stop there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Avin Bola. The previous speaker is an English critique, so I hope he doesn't critique my speech. Okay, I just find it quite amazing that the IEC is always picked upon that voters are not voting. Now, the problem lies with political parties because they don't understand the founding provisions of the Constitution and the preamble. There was a survey done and the DTP did a presentation, I think about 2 years ago, where it was found that citizens of this country don't really favor a government as long as the basic needs are met. Now, if you look at the composition of political parties, there's not proper demographic representation. So who are they appealing to? Now, don't call me a minority. I have an inherent right to this country. And I'm a bona fide citizen. So if you tell me to go back to my country, which part of South Africa do you want to meet me at? And as well, the electorate are mature nowadays. You find the youngsters are not voting because nobody's appealing and they don't want to carry the baggage of their parents. The apartheid system is done and dusted. They have no experience of that. So the political parties here again are not appealing to the masses. The politicians themselves don't understand their own role. They don't understand Act 108 of 1996, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. They actually stand up in public and make utter fools of themselves, and they expect that we're going to just accept the drivel that's coming in. So in closing, I'd like to know what the political parties are going to do to address all these anomalies. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll take the third question and then I'll hand over to the panelists to answer. You go for it, yes. Oh, no, sorry, sir. So we'll just give to, no. We'll give to the gentleman at the back and then, yeah.
Is it afternoon or morning? Oh, good afternoon all. Yes, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I'm Damola Kinlade from UKZN. Yeah, I'm a Nigerian. Yeah, so I'm going to bring a bit of what I have because I was so glad somebody mentioned, I think Chief, he mentioned Nigeria the other time. But basically, I'm going to start first with what the doctor said the other time. When we talk about how do we get young people to vote, because we found out that there's this, what we call voters apathy, whereby people are far away from voting and want to find out why they are not voting. One thing we need to understand here is that the leadership, the system had failed everyone everywhere politically. And for that reason, people are taking precautions as to what they are supposed to do. So when we look at that, and that's what gives rise to what we call populism, all that we see all around. So as people are having their parts, that this is what we want to do, we also have the political system trying to put people in there without consulting the masses on their own. That's when we see that there's no equitable representation of who we want to be there at that system. So the question I'm asking here is this, if we have different political parties who don't have that financial muscle or who are not that politically entrenched in terms of how to get to power, that's the essence why we have a lot of political parties coming together to form an alliance against the one, maybe for example, the ANC that we have here. Because I've seen it play out well in Nigeria. If you look at our democracy, probably started 1999 when Chief Olusegun Obasanjo was there. Virtually all the states in Nigeria were one particular party, but Lagos State was different. And you can see the effect of Lagos State in Nigerian politics today. That was the only party that was different from any other party. They evolved from that to ACN. ACN evolved to APC, which eventually ousted the past political party, which was PDP, national one. And that's what we have presently now. And there is no telling that this present dispensation won't go ahead. What made that to be very successful was because smaller parties came together and they merged. So they were able to host the bigger one. So the question here is this, can they do the same thing in South Africa? But I know that what is going well for ANC is because of some largesse that are going to people who are old now, and they don't want to lose that. So that's when Malema is talking, they don't want to listen to him because they can't be too sure whether what ANC asks as a bedrock for them, EFF will be able to give the same. So I think we should be looking at how we can make smaller parties get stronger, coming together. That's why you can fight the big lion at the top there. Thank you.
Thank you. Joanna? Okay, you go for it.
Okay.
I did have interest in responding
okay,
to what you were
please
saying.
go for it. Yeah, I thought you were still processing. So I was like, okay.
It's interesting what he's noting, particularly because if you look at what happened post the 2016 elections in Tshwane, in Gauteng, particularly in Johannesburg municipality, and in Nelson Mandela Bay. And we've seen this in Africa, in other parts of the continent. We've seen this in Zimbabwe, coalition government in Zimbabwe, in Kenya, in Lesotho. And the city of Johannesburg makes an interesting case study where multi-party arrangements actually on its own because it's unstable and they collapse. The city of Johannesburg did it in, was it 2 years? It was
Yeah,
2016 August up until 2019 December, November, December, and the ANC took back power. So on the one hand, it speaks to, I agree with you that on the one hand, parties coming together to unseat a ruling party that is not serving its citizens. It speaks to some forms of expressing democracy. But with the city of Johannesburg in particular, and I think it was the same with Tshwane, it's because this was a forced marriage. Because there are parties with different political manifestos, which then means that they've got different policies. And then they weren't agreeing. And also, I think also the influence of the single power political party is important. In this case, it was the EFF, because the EFF had the voting power. So on the one hand, we had what they called the DA-led coalition, but in practice, the EFF had the power. The EFF owned the throne. And so I think one of the important things that if we are to go through multi-party arrangements, it's important for these parties that are coming together to really think through it and in some way relinquish their own individual powers. And I think with the city of Johannesburg in particular as well, there were no coalition arrangements. So there were no documents and regulatory framework that were binding to them because they were figuring it out. So here we are, we want to unseat the NC, let's meet quickly and do this. But also on a technical level, none of them had the ruling, the 50.1 voter, whatever that they needed, numbers that they needed. So I do think that there's a place for multi-party arrangements, but political parties will have to navigate that in a very careful manner. Because like I said, it didn't work in Zimbabwe. It definitely didn't work in Kenya. It definitely didn't work in Lesotho. It definitely did not work in the city of Johannesburg, but it's something that can definitely be explored.
Yeah. I definitely agree with those sentiments. And I think, you know what's difficult about opposition politics in our country is that they constantly, barring the few that I can recognize that they are trying, but it's just an absence of resources. The three big opposition parties in our country, most of the issues that they are affected by are like own goals. Constantly, the DA is having issues without even having to engage the ANC in any real way. There's still sort of a discussion around what is our identity really? What do we want to be? How do we want to come across into the rest of the country, as it were? The EFF, with the promise of a new political ideology and way of working, they've also become embroiled in some issues that are significant within the ruling party, for instance. To what extent can, as citizens, rely on a party that seems to fall back on its original home, as it were? Because some of these, the other problem was political parties that contest and are visible in opposition politics in the country is quite significant. Number of them are breakaways from the ruling party. So to what extent are they providing real policy alternatives to the ruling party, and to what extent can we create a real difference in the mind of the voter about the choice that they're having to make actively? So that's the one part about the political parties, for instance, that come as a result of breaking away from the mother party, who is likely the ANC. And then we look at the fact that contestation is not just contestation for the sake of ideology. And in South Africa, it's a lot about patronage. It's about who must eat, as Ubaba was talking about. So the problem with that then is that if I contest either as an individual candidate and I contest as a small party, my propensity to want to be in a space where I'm constantly eating means that I will align myself with the dominant political narrative in the space in which I'm occupying, which means then you're conceding to this very same party that you're contesting against in some instances, which means that as an independent candidate at council, I will listen to what the ANC caucus is talking about, and I will likely vote with them because it means it guarantees my ability to access certain patronage systems that have formed in our political arena. If I am at National Assembly, if you look at the story, for instance, of Good, and preceding that Good, it was the breakaway party from the IFP. I've just forgotten their name because they haven't been in the news for that long. NFP. Yes. So first, what the ANC strategically does is they offer you a position as a deputy minister somewhere. Once you're there as a minister or deputy minister, your ability to counteract certain things inside parliament become that much more difficult because it's like, but you're part of our government. Why are you talking as though you're outside of the room? What are you doing actively to resolve it when you're having cabinet meetings with us? So these self-owned by opposition parties, then for the bulk of it, so listen, like, I don't mind ANC dominance, right? But the problem is when ANC dominance is unchecked by any legitimate opposition, right? So what I mean by being unchecked, I mean there's no real challenge and uncertainty about their positionality in our society. They feel, as the former president had mentioned, we will rule until Jesus comes back, because legitimately, if the opposition doesn't do anything more significant in the space to make themselves relevant, then surely Jesus will come back, and then we'll still have the one ruling party. And that's not to say that the ANC doesn't have any issues of its own, but it's like, guys, if you really want to do something about this, and if you're really interested in shifting politics, show us what you're about. There's a lot of space that's currently available, specifically because young people have divested from the electoral process. Then for someone to say, we're coming in and we're going to do this. In 2019 elections, when we had that many parties on the ballot, how many of those parties differed at a fundamental ideological level, for instance? What assessments can we make of those groupings that came up as for instance, there was a party representing security officers. It was security workers, I think, something like that. But they made it onto national and provincial ballot in some provinces. There was a party, but these multitude of small parties, there is potential for them to join, but also, as I said, we're also contesting for patronage. We're also contesting for the ability to gain, to eat something. If I'm not going to eat something by being in coalition with you, I'm not going to join you for that long. But then, of course, the ideology is also quite significant. Yeah. The rifts with IFP, EFF, and DA are significant because they form such a huge component of opposition politics in our country, and UDM, of course. They form such significant component of our opposition politics, which means that they need to actually stick to their ideology. If their ideology for the relationship with the DA and EFF was always going to be problematic. They come from diverse, like it's just oil and water. So I don't understand how that relationship even itself could have been. And the thing is, because we only interested in unseating the ANC, then it means somehow we are short-sighted in our politics as well. That's what I was drawn to in terms of my response. I don't know if I've forgotten.
What you're mentioning is actually interesting. So part of my master's, I looked at that, right? And it was interesting in the city of Johannesburg that, so it was the DA, obviously, the EFF, though the EFF was not part of the coalition officially, they just had the voting powers. It was the IFP and ACDP and COPE. And then initially there was a smaller Muslim party that came out. But it was interesting in my conversations with the councillors, all of them were actually willing to relinquish some of their political ideologies for the success of the coalition, except for the EFF. So the EFF was the only party that said, number one, just also to reaffirm their power, their voting power, they decided not to join the coalition officially, right, and formally. And secondly, they were fighting the DA all the time, and understandably so, because their political ideologies are so different. And so, and also one of the biggest questions that came, that councillors struggled with, was that what they offered their electorates when they were campaigning, it looked like they failed their own electorates, because now their supporters were saying, now you are here supporting the white party when we thought you were on our side. So they constantly had to say to their supporters, we are not here supporting the DA, but we are here to unseat the ANC. And I think that's where the problem lied, that the main agenda was to unseat the ANC. They did not have a bigger and clear strategy of what they were going to do and what forms of governance for them would look like. They had one enemy, and the plan was, let's get rid of the enemy. And then once they got rid of the enemy, now they are in the room, they've got the room to themselves, then they realized that actually they are enemies themselves. And then that became very problematic for them.
Actually, I was saying that some people are using the race card for some other purposes, like particularly in this case, as Bonolo is saying, that the main purpose was to unseat the ANC. So we see that even in sports, the first speaker was talking about why people vote. They will vote people who are sharing some socio-political background with. Right now, a particular team is not doing very well today. So then there is another team that is doing extremely well. And then they start reminding people of their ethnic group, that we are a particular ethnic group. So Hebe is becoming an issue these days. So those are some of the things. I am not there. So I want to go back to this point of the ideologies. It's a very good thing, really, that smaller parties come together, become a strong force, so that they have an effect. But it is very much unfortunate that if you observe the current trends today, you will notice that the smaller parties, they forget, I don't want to say smaller parties, but I will say some emerging parties, they forget their primary objective. So they should be there for people, they should be there to form government, control things, make things happen. But you'll find that ideology is not the issue at all. And people who are following it do not even know what do we stand for. I had a luxury of time during COVID-19 level 2. Then I took the constitutions and even the manifestos, yes, of the parties. And you see, the leaders were playing with language. They were saying the very same thing. It's like one particular manifesto, one constitution has been taken and then put in different ways. But the essence of the message is the same. Then you ask yourself, if it was about ideology, was there a need to start this party? So this is very sad, because at the end of the day, people who are going to be mobilized to follow that party do not know anything. They follow that particular man or woman, in most cases men. So they will follow that man saying that they are a particular political party. So there's a question that I have. It's a worry that I have, which really is threatening democracy. That is why the presentations were talking about scrutinizing the internal processes of political parties, so that we see that what is happening is exactly what is supposed to be seen. Then the other thing, it's not necessarily about the people to other parties. I'm not talking about your party, but other parties. People are far there at the back. They are not there in what you do, in what you plan. So you must notice that those parties, there will be one person all the time. So whenever there is this, DDP calls this, you know, if you are inviting a political party, you know who is there. So if there is another meeting taking place in the different room, then half me will be here, the other will be there. So something is happening, it's same person. So the whole thing is about an individual, not the people. And people are lured to follow a person, not a party, without understanding the nitty-gritties, the reasons, the history behind, the motive, the rationale behind the formation of that party. But if that is perceived quite well, which is our work as civil society, to give space for the community, for the citizens, for the community at large, to understand those things, so that whatever they do, they know exactly. They know exactly. And one was talking about people complaining today. They complain for the next 5 years, up until the 27th of October. Say, well, for the lack of better alternative, okay, it's fine, I'm going to give this comrade a ticket. Then they choose, not necessarily out of merit, not because it's because the party is doing very well, has delivered on what it has promised, and so on. So I think on an ongoing basis, our work needs to ensure that the public participates, the public knows how far they can go. Some don't even know that we can go as far as getting into knowing how did my chairperson, my president, how did that get selected or elected? So what was involved? So all those things, people, the parties, they do not know who is funding the party that I'm part of. So they will be seen talking to people, and all to learn later that, oh man, this is a sponsor of my party. So things are kept to a selected few within parties, not to the people who are really making the party vibrant, who are the actual representatives. But coming together of smaller parties or emerging parties or new parties will really make a difference if they have looked carefully at the issue of ideology and the reason why the formation in the first place.
Thank you. Any more comments from the panel? We good?
Regarding the issue of the independent parties that seem rather unrepresentative, or they look like they are not representing anyone. Many a times, those parties are only independent as far as the election. After elections, they are supposed to, after the elections, they immediately supposed to look to form a partnership with another party in order for them to survive. Yeah.
Okay. So it's an attempt to survive, actually. So the one that has power takes over power. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to the lady in the front, and then Butsandile had a question, and then Obaba, then Ubuti here. You can use this mic, please.
Yeah, she raised the hand for me. I was going to the toilet, and I didn't want to miss this opportunity. So she was my hand when I want here. Okay. For those that don't know me, don't know nothing. I'm Sheldon, by the way. It was a great honor to listen to you guys speak. It was so informative, like the ANC. Yes, I actually did learn a lot from you, and I'm going to take it back to my community and also ask them, but where was I getting at was, we are talking about the IC and the panels. One of the things, especially in the communities I come from, when you're going to vote, youth for one, because there's a lot you got to unpack with them concerning the IEC is not a political party, you know? And then elderly people too, you also got to explain to them, because you get to vote, you go into the station, then you'll find the ANC got a gazebo there. And then they got ANC t-shirts, and then they're handing out prioni. So automatically, if you don't support the ANC, you feel like, you know what, due to all this corruption, and I'm not blaming the ANC for corruption in voting, but I'm saying, due to the current things that are going on in the country, people will then say, ANC is there, I'm not going to vote there, because no matter who I vote for, ANC is going to win. because that's their voting station. So some walk away and don't end up voting. All right? And then some that do go vote, just some will vote for ANC one time. So that's now making people believe that they must vote for ANC or don't vote at all. That's where I'm coming from. You got to educate people, especially in the color community, when it comes to politics. Because it's one thing colors don't believe in as politics. Just yesterday, we were talking, myself and Precious, because we're from the same community. And why I'm bringing this up, it's all going to boil down to the time when it comes to campaigning and stuff, you know. My people, well, how can I put it? The mistake political parties make is coming to address the country or community and promising stuff they'll never be able to deliver. Come to us and tell us, listen, for the next 5 years, we can only give 10 youth in its community jobs. That's all we have. Tell us that. Let us know from where go. You don't have jobs for 500 youth. We will respect and say, right, let's see the strongest 10, let's push them forward. There's people like Makale, for example, smaller degrees, but unemployed. Let's push people like Kano community to go get these jobs. The others, what you'll do is come give us skill development. All right? Do that so long. About just before this, I think it was the elections back, I won't mention a political party, came to me and said, right, we're going to give you 4 buses. Bring us 1,000 of youth. We're going to chat with Center. Now, these people know you don't know responsibility. We can tell by the striking. You don't know much about taking things step by step. They want everything now. So as long as you're going to buy them alcohol and entertain them with all these AKAs and all these local singers, they think that's going to happen for the next 5 years. So they go and vote for these parties because we entertain them just before the elections. And the elderly people got this thing, if I don't vote, my pension will get cut. And if I go for grocery hampers before the elections, the rest of my elections, I'll get grocery hampers, which never happens. So, Martinez, when we go to these voting stations or panels, let's make it strictly, even the people helping, strictly IEC t-shirts, and not coming with your own private political party. Let people be free for voting without, before they even go voting, they were intimidated. Because that's exactly what's happening. All right, thank you.
Thanks. Cool.
What are you implying?
Okay, yeah, well, thank you, Program Director. Firstly, I would like to start by thanking and appreciating the DDP for bringing us together and to just raise our consciences on the issues that are lying ahead. And then to just mention something in passing, which happened this morning. As I was driving to this very event, I listened to the 8 o'clock news where it was announced that a councillor in one of the municipalities in the Eastern Cape, I think it's the one that has been renamed with Matigizela Mandela. Yes, a person was gunned down by a local councillor using an unlicensed firearm. The person who was killed, he was going to stand for local government elections that are forthcoming. Yes, and then I was just touched that I'm going to this event and things are already happening because the announcement was made a few days ago that we'll be having these elections. And so when police was presenting, my heart was bleeding to say that it's only beginning now and October is still far away. And the question to ask is, if we say we will target hotspots, I think we'll be making a mistake because each and every ward is a hotspot because it's contested. And it's also happening at the time when there is this new thing of people who have to step aside. And then, which also has its own challenges, because when I step aside, I have to go down to the masses and go, which will also lead to more challenges. And it's all happening within the context of COVID-19, where gatherings of people are limited. There has to be nominations processes where candidates are nominated, and there has to be campaigns. How do you manage all these processes to ensure that the elections are free, fair, and credible? I'm just opening a can of worms, but it's things that we need to think about, and the load of work that is lying ahead, especially for us as civil society, because if we were to fold hands and wait for the government to take a lead, it won't happen. That's why I was appreciating the DDPP, and to say that if there are possibilities of getting resources, and for us who are conscious of what is happening, we are available. Yeah. And for all of us to say that we can't allow things to happen and we fold hands. The challenge is on us to salvage our country. Thank you.
Baba had a question.
Ngizwele uma ngabe kukhulunywa political violence monitoring. But every time ihlale ngihlupha lento ukuthi why kuthiwe it's monitoring, because automatically into moyimonitor awuyiqedi, uyayimonitor nje ukuthi ayiqhubeke ibe khona. Why ngisho lokho? It happened in 1994 kukhona i-peace accord, and ngangomunye wama-trainer peace monitors. Omunye wabantu abamdubula wayekade nesonto ngade ngimtrain. Kwathiwa kudutshulwa yena, kudutshulwa amajuba lawa ayengaphambi kwakhe, iskipa esigqokile. Kodwa yayikhona lento kumina ukuthi why sithi i-violence sayimonitor. And I started ukuthi let's go and make sure ukuthi siya intervene and sense mediation. Okwesibili, angikhulume ngala ngendawo yako North Coast. I-political scoring yakhona kuzobe kuyi-issue yitimela. Kwamashu ehostela yakwa ehostel nomashu. I-political scoring yama-political organization kuzobe kuyi-issue yesitimela, because isitimela sigcina eDuffs Road kwamasha si. So leyo nto iyakutshela ukuthi automatically seyikhona into ezovusa udlame, because khona bazodefend. Okugcina khona lokho enikhulume ngakho, ngiyimember nje serious yepolitiki. Yeah, but angikaze ngikujabulele ukuthi ngene ku government. And abanye baye bathi Comrade Chris wayizulalela alingenele angene ku government. But believe me, why ngeke? Because mina uqobo lwami ngithi ngeke ngiye ku government okhona, because akuwona lo government esasimlwela nesasimfuna. So government okhona njengamanje it's a imitation yento esasiyifuna. That's why kuzohlala kunama problems. Khona lo kinikushilo kwabantu abahlanganayo babe bafuna coalition. Ngeke bakwazi ukuyenza coalition because izinto zakhona zikho based on principle. Fanele baqale babe nama principle okwenza ipolitiki yabo iqine. Uma ungathulwa ne-opposition party izokutshela ukuthi mina ngaba khona before wena ube khona. Ngiyisusela kuphi bese bayakutshela ukuthi ene ngoba izimpi the wars ezazikhona sayibamba safinyelela la. And leyo nto iyakutshela ukuthi sisukaphi. Ngaphezulu kwalokho ama-political parties afomekayo ayagxeke izinto ezikhona. Immediately mawugxeka impesheni uthi wena ngeke kubanikeza abantu impesheni, inkinga leyo. Immediately ugxeka ukuthi wena abekhonelana ama-grants, inkinga leyo. So automatically usuluzile, awukakayi ku-contest, usakhuluma nje nge-manifesto yakho wagxeka lokho okukhona. So mhlambe kusafanele siqale sifunde ipolitiki, but ipolitiki siyicabanga ukuthi umbusazwe. Ipolitiki it's about opposing the idea of another one. That's a politics. It's not about how to govern the country. Mhlambe ileli gama elithi politics ekuyilona elisidingayo impikiswano, the essence of it. Mhlambe ke kuyafuneka ngelinye ilanga eke sikwazi ukukhuluma ngempela ukuthi uma sikhuluma ngokubusa kwezwe sikhuluma ngani, singakhulumi sithi enekhona into eyipolitiki ngoba mase uyichaza ipolitiki impikiswano nje kuphela. Ukuthi uphikisa mangabe kwenze njani kade kutheni, but okusalayo impikiswano. Ngelinye ilanga siyokwenza iChristianity politics, niyothi akuyona ipolitiki ngoba sekukhulunywa ngeChristian. Ikhona nakhona iChristian ipolitiki yakhona, as well as lamabandla esikuwona, Buddhism, Shembes, and all over. There is politics of that kind of, the nature of it, whatever. But at the end, okufanele sikwazi ukuthi, like for instance, mangabuza kunina, ngesikhathi kumasho kuliwa ne-Afrikaans, yini yakuliwa nayo? Kwakuwukuthi asiyifuni Afrikaans. Kwakuyilokho. But mina mangakutshela ukuthi why ngangimasha ngithi angiyifuni Afrikaans, ngangingasho ukuthi angiyifuni Afrikaans, but ngangithi angiyifuni Afrikaans ukuthi ibe official language. So omunye umuntu mekhuluma uzokutshela ukuthi ene samashela ukuthi asiyifuni Afrikaans. Omunye akutshela ukuthi samashela ukuthi asiyifuni induku. Hayi ukuthi sasingayifuni induku ukuthi isebenze. Sasingayifuni induku eyayisetshenziswa ngendlela eyayisetshenziswa ngayo. Ngifeyili test because benginenkinga ekhaya. Ngithola u20 atho 40 sengizoshaya u10 ukuze ngithole u30. Kodwa ngiwuthole lo 30 elokhuzeni lapha phansi. Kodwa sengishayiwe ngajeziswa. So induku yayi wrong lapho. Yayingasetshenziselwa induku ukungibuyisa nokuthi ngiconcentrate. So zonke lezi zinto uma ngabe uzibeka together zikwenza ukuthi the evil of the past bese uyibona iyimpi bese understand ukuthi part ekhona njengamanje busayo why ngiyisupport noma ngabe angisaboni kahle. Bese kuzobe kokugcina corruption lesikhuluma ngayo. I-corruption ayakhiwa ukuthi mina ngicorrupt. I-corruption yakhiwa ukuthi lamanzi bekufanele ngiwanikeze umfowethu awaphuza. So ngangasawanikezi yena ngawanikeza lo. Khona izinto ekuvele kuthiwa babe corrupt because bathathe imali yezindlu bakha ngayo umgwaqo. Bese kuthiwa i-corruption. Zonke lezi zinto kusafanele sizikwazi ukuyifunda ku-government ukuthi uma ungabe ukhuluma nge-corruption ka-government ukhuluma kusiphi isimo. So ngesikhathi i-ANC isibuya izoyichaza lento bese understand bebebheda nakho kuyikonakona. Uma ngabe ithi i-ANC ngithatha imali yokwakha istadium ngakhe izindlu uba ungekayivotela. So ilezo zinto kusafanele sikwazi ukuyichaza si-understand no government esithi siyawuvotela ngoba izona zinto eziyinkinga. Ngiyabonga.
I'm going to take the last question from Ubudi. Please keep it brief. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you. My name is Pegizenzo. Well, for me, it's not really a question, it's just a concern as a young person, because I've been hearing everyone, talking about the violence, the elections, and the lack of participation for young people when it comes to voting. But I think there is nothing that will encourage young people or anybody to vote if the situation they are voting for remains the same. Our government has a duty to construct the structure of our society. It is the government's duty. So if the government is not doing that, there is nothing that will change, because the structure of society that we are living in today was constructed by government, which is apartheid government. So if you do not change that system, we'll always blame each other, because as a government, we're supposed to come up with laws and enforce them. That's what the apartheid government did. So I'll always, even if you take out the ANC today, you put in the EFF, it will do the very same thing. Because now we have not changed the structure of society. Like young people, they don't want to participate because maybe they are not educated the importance of voting. But they would say, I won't vote because nothing will change. So if you take somebody, you put them into power and that they are not doing their job, that is the problem. It is the structure. So if our government can change the whole system, then everything will change. this is just a chess game. We can vote for anybody. They will come and chow money, will be starving. And the kind of education that we have is fooling us around, because it makes us, the educated, to seem as if we are successful. We'll drive our cars living in the beautiful houses that we don't own because we are still paying for them. And the people there, the majority, will think from the community that we are successful now. And then back there, we're always fighting amongst ourselves. I want to become a councillor so that I can be able to take these resources, because we are fighting over these little resources because the structure of society compels us to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I hand over to the panel, we have somebody from the ANC here. I got your name. Ma'am, I apologize. I can't read my own handwriting. Suresh Govender. I'm wondering if you have any reflections for 2 minutes or 3 minutes on some of the conversations that we've heard from the ANC's point of view.
First of all, I want to thank the DTP for the opportunity of inviting me to this event. I'm quite a busy person. I serve on various communities, various organizations. We're actually preparing for our conference on Sunday, and I should be part of the auditing team. And also I have my research on my master's to submit before end of May. But when I heard about the topic sent to me, as a politician, I had an interest to be here. I just want to agree with the very first person on the outset of opening this meeting. Ma'am, it's none other than yourself. In terms of the voter decrease since 1994, I want to say or reiterate that as the national and local government elections are happening, there have been many decreases. It is because of the unhappiness of a voter. But representing the ANC and representing SANCO, which is also a civic movement from the provincial level, I must say that I stand here today unashamedly to say that I am a member of good standing in the African National Congress. Let me tell you why. It is because if you belong to a family and if your family member has let you down, you don't bring the old Mandla family down. You stay inside that family and you do the corrections, whether it comes out or bend. I must tell you, being a member of the ANC and joining politics in 1990, and I was a newly married bride, not even having a child at then, I joined politics. So I'm like in about 29 years into 30 years into politics by now, and that will calculate my age to you. When I hear all the different sentiments heard about the ANC, my thought ran to say, rather than complying or complaining, why don't you, whichever organization you belong to, tell us what you can do, come up with your manifestos, come up with your policies to counteract what is happening in the ANC. I don't like just complaining. I like to be part of the cleaning up or part of the procedure of making a change, because you as a citizen of South Africa, then you are entitled to make that change. So I've heard I heard one of the first speaker after our tea break, the gentleman on my right, who said that councillors takes the matter to the PR. I just want to correct that. A PR is a party representative. You don't take your matters to the party representative, you take it to council itself. Or you take it to your party which you belong to, because your party has put you into that position and they are correctly there to listen to what you have to say with your complaints. I know some of the times that within the ANC, they say we'll comply and complain later. And I stand there with a fight to my organization or my leadership and say by complying and complaining later is actually creating a huge problem. It's like your cupboards. If you don't clean your cupboards and keep putting things, that's something that is rotten, eventually it's going to give off the smell. I've been attacked 5 times. Today, by the grace of God, I still stand here. It's because I am not a leader that keeps my mouth shut. I speak because I represent people and not animals. Even my dog at home knows that I represent him as a mommy of the house. How much more for our people? Now, we have 2 types of candidates who are councillors. One are there for their own interest, whether it's the ANC, whether it's any other political parties. If you're looking at the DA itself, and I'm not here to attack anybody, but I'm citing an example. If you look at the DA, what they did in the last election, they put Musi Mayamane as the president, only because to draw the votes from the Africans for the white party. After he has done that, where is he today? He's nowhere. He has to form his own party. So let me tell you, political problems are not just in the ANC, it's in all other parties. However, all eyes are on the ANC. It is because we are the leading government. So comrades, I want to say again, I stand here unashamedly to say I'm a member of the ANC in good standing and I serve them. If I want to be able to correct them, I correct them from the inside, not from the outside. It's same like when you got a problem in your family, you don't go and discuss the manlas with the sifisos or go from one region to the other. You discuss it within your families and you correct it.
Thank you, ma'am. Unfortunately, we've run out of time.
Okay, I just want to say this lastly, just under a minute, ma'am. Killings has not started now, it started all long before. If you look at before the first democratic elections, Chris Hani was assassinated and his assassinator know who has asked him to pull the trigger to kill Chris Hani. Up till today, he's not singing, but he's rotting in jail. And he's asking for, to be released and he's not being released until he tells us. It's just because of power into leadership. So I stand here again, and I want to close by saying I am an unashamed member of the African National Congress.
Thank you, ma'am. We commend your convictions. I'm going to hand over to Boise from the UTM. I don't know if you have any particular reflections or not. You can use this one.
Greetings to everyone. Can you hear me? I don't know what's wrong with this thing. Closer. Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. The problem is everybody wants to tackle ANC instead of tackling the developmental problems. We as parties that are called oppositions should be going out to people and say, we have identified this problem and that problem, which is developmental, and here's how we're going to solve that problem. But we don't say that we sing ANC. Let me give you an example. There is an Umzinyati district up in the north. We as the UDM, we don't have councillors inside there, but we are driving them crazy. This is how we're doing it. We understand the constitutional provisions. So when those people that are in the council are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, we take them on. There are mechanisms. For example, they're failing to provide people with water. We've taken them to South African Human Rights Commission. Being outside, not even inside, taking advantage of the provisions of the Constitution. You might have heard about the Ngotu being an administrator being put in Ngotu municipality. I can prove it to you today that we wrote to Shomuga to ask him to put the Ngotu under administration because we understand the constitutional provisions, and it happened. there was this big noise about naming that district municipality about Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. We stopped it because we understand the constitutional provisions. It's about understanding what we're supposed to be doing for people at whatever level and enforce that. That's what the UTM says.
Okay, thank you so much. We've already run out of time. So Spamandla, I'm going to time you. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to make your reflections.
Can I go last so that I can go with the vote of thanks for the organization as well?
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Sure.
So I'll give Dr. Florence 3 minutes and I'll give Policy 3 minutes, just to, if you want to respond to any question or just even give your final remarks, that's okay.
I want to thank all the participants. It has been a good discussion, a very healthy one. And just to look at a few things, I just wish to reiterate that sometimes we blame the politicians, we say they are corrupt, and yet we as voters are the ones who motivate them or force them to get corrupt. Because if as a ward councillor or an MP, I'm paid this amount of, this is my salary, and then everybody is coming to me, they want this and that, where do I get that extra money to support them? So sometimes the electorate also forces the politicians to become corrupt, especially here in Africa. You know, we want the person we have elected to solve all our problems. And many a times it is not possible. So we also need to reflect on that. Which role am I playing as a citizen to ensure that this representative that I voted for does not get caught up in corruption? And then the other thing is that we all need to play our role, as the previous speaker indicated. We also need to go out there and get educated. Let's get the knowledge so that we know our rights and how to tackle issues that come our way. Otherwise, when we act out of ignorance, then it becomes dangerous and also unhealthy. So it's our responsibility, it's each and every one of us is a responsibility to ensure that we know what we are supposed to know. We don't act out of ignorance. And then thirdly, I would also encourage each one of us to know that there's nothing that cannot be changed. No situation is permanent. So we must be ready to advocate for change where necessary, not just change as in we need change. So, and I'm not talking about, voting for a different person. I'm talking about, changing almost all aspects of our lives, even political aspects. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Policy 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good people, thank you very much. I hope we have realized that the power is with us. So we have power within. So in most cases, when we take certain decisions, we are giving power away. Then we continue complaining. So it is us that will decide that we are not going to vote, or we're not going to vote for such a thing because of 1, 2, 3. We can correct things with our own vote. So we must realize that the power is with us, and then we make noise. Somebody was saying that we complain for the whole period of 5 years, then we do the very same thing. After having taken power, we complain, but we said, here is power. Then we'll continue complaining. So we need to be aware of that. So, and all these things I'm hearing from the floor, from the colleagues here. So
let us realize the power that we have and use it wisely. Secondly, I want to respond to one of the speakers who was talking about certain concepts that we use. So there is quite a lot that is in the name. We tend to follow what the name is saying. Language is very powerful. It's all about semantics. Thank you very much for bringing the issue of violence monitoring. So it will give the connotation that violence, it's okay, let it be there, but let us look at how it is going. Let us look, you see, that has been an ongoing debate within the mission, violence monitoring mission itself. So there is a steering committee that is dealing with that. It was raised 10 years ago, then elections came, it was raised again. I think now we need to come to a point where this is really done once and for all. It's dealt with once and for all. So thank you very much for raising that. So I was taking note of things that are coming from the floor so that as the meetings gather according to commissions, according to missions, violence monitoring mission, mediation, and so on, observation. So we know that people are more interested in this. So thank you very much for raising such things. And then last point, I'm so happy that most of our discussions were around education, that more education, more engagement is needed. So we will benefit out of that in the house like this, over the radio, social media. So we even have community radio stations in the house. So they give space. We share things with the public, they engage. Let us continue doing that so that whenever we make our points with confidence. Thank you very much, good people.
Okay, thank you so much. This has been a very meaningful conversation. I want to thank the panelists, Dr. Florence, Budumbolisi, and Spamandla, for a very engaging discussion. And just the fact that the three of you came very well prepared. And thank you again to everyone who participated. And I know that DDP will have ongoing conversations of this nature as we prepare for the upcoming elections. And I would want to encourage you to continue to join in these conversations and to offer your support to DDP. And from the Center for Human Rights as well, we want to say thank you for your partnership. And we look forward to more work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm taking back my power from Ubona. No, I'm joking. No, thank you so much, guys, for having been able to be a part of the conversation. This is more where I'm comfortable. There is something else. So as an organization, I think we really value the opportunity to be able to convene and talk about these things. But what we also want to say as we talk and discuss is, if there's no real value in having conversations like this, if nothing shifts for you at sort of a fundamental level, to what extent are you able to then extract some of this information and use it either in favor of the constituencies that you work with, or to use it yourself to be able to uplift the constituency that you serve. So that it's very important that the impact for you is meaningful enough to the extent that it shifts and it's able to move things forward. So if you have any thoughts and suggestions around certain things that we need to start considering as we undertake our work around this electoral process in particular, please make sure that you send us an email, that you tag us on Twitter, you tag us on Facebook and all of those sorts of things, because one of the other things is that people do really well when they get embarrassed on social media. So maybe we'll if you haven't been having fun on our email addresses, Mhlampumbali is not responding to your emails. When you send an email, just tag us on Facebook and let us know. I'm talking about something that's very important for my community, and I would like for you to address these things. All of the stuff that we spoke about here, whilst we did a lot of preparation and we are aware of the fact that in some respects, the constituents are somewhat different. And whilst Bonolo called us experts, what I also want to make sure that you understand is that most of the valuable information doesn't rest at the top here, but it rests with you and the communities that you serve. The nature of understanding why people vote and don't vote, at the core of it has the ability to emerge from those people themselves. So if we don't engage our communities effectively enough, then we can continue to be in a space where we don't feel like we're moving forward as progressively as we would like to. So when we talk about communities, I'm talking about your constituencies, your church, inside your political party itself. If there's not sufficient opportunities for participation and engagement, then the conversations that we have here are going to be meaningless, except for the pictures that we take at the end and say we did something nice. So let's not walk away having done something nice, but actually move towards actual actions that will demonstrate our commitment to a better South Africa. The work that's unfolding right now, and some of it is unfolding just as people are talking and giving impetus to some of this. So the one big thing that we will be hosting for sure around elections is as many political parties as are willing to participate will be hosting an engagement where they will unpack their manifestos as it relates to local government elections. Given the COVID environment, we're not going to shift. Even if people are saying we're no longer going to have the third wave, we're still going to behave as though a third wave is coming. Because we live in Durban, hey, sorry. All right, so we're gonna continue to try and comply with COVID-19 regulations to the extent that we can. So it means that sometimes if you are not able to come and RSVP on time for the in-person engagement, please make sure that you join us as well on our online platforms, because that's where the conversation will continue. So the one is the political parties having an opportunity to tell us about their manifestos, and then you as either civil society, as a citizen, being able to engage them on that and say, what's different from 2016 that you're offering right now? What has been the work that you've been undertaking in the past couple of years that merits that you get that position again, or that you get that position for the first time if you are contesting for that position for the first time? Tomorrow, as many of you might know, we are in the process of training observers on some of these very elements. Some of you are on that list already, and for those of you who had not heard or are not on that list, I'm sorry, we are fully booked. Utandio would scream at me if I try to let more people come through, and I don't like being scolded at all. Like as a child, so we have our observer mission being trained. So if you want to join us virtually, we will make that available on our Twitter account and on our Facebook account. So if you access that, I think on Facebook, we are the Democracy Development Program, NPC, on our Facebook page. And at Instagram and Twitter, we are at DDP_tweets. Is it, or at Democracy Tweet? What is it? Wow. I'm embarrassed. Okay, but you can ask my colleagues anyways. Other than that, lunch is upstairs by the pool. So you please use the stairs. Just before you go, you go on your right upstairs by the pool. Enjoy yourself. We'll see you tomorrow for those of you who are coming back. And if you haven't RSVP'd and are not on that list, please avoid coming here at all. COVID la. Just and then I'm going to ask our representatives from the ANC and the UDM to join us at the front, please. Whilst please make sure, enjoy lunch and take care. Yeah, you're not allowed to swim in the pool, eh? Because, okay, I'm a representative. Nomzan, please join us for the picture as well now. Get that. Yes.
Bye, Pusanji. It was so good to see you.
Shucks.
Yeah, I'm just so tired. Really? Okay. Yes.
Who do you work for now? Please, can you hold your phone for me, Bonolo? Thank you. Is it? Okay, let me switch off my mic. Testing. Can we? Okay. Isikhwama ngasibeka la kwamanje. Yeah. Ladies, who wants to join us on stage for a picture? Okay, cool.